What is up, everyone? Welcome back. Today we have a big one. We have author, journalist, historian Domenic Priore on the show. I've been wanting to do this interview for a long time. This honestly is my dream interview. Dominic, how are you?
I'm fine. I'm doing good.
Thanks so much for coming on. I really appreciate it. It's an absolute dream come true. Why don't you tell us just a little bit about your background? What is your degree in?
Television production and studio operations.
That's my same here. That's my degree. Although my degree is in digital video technology.
Right, right. I learned Avid editing was like the last thing I learned and
Yeah,
then promptly forgot how to do it. I can direct, but I can't. I'm not really good with technology anymore. I'm good at directing technology, but not doing. I'm not
yeah.
an engineer.
Where'd you go to school?
Pasadena City College.
Gotcha, gotcha. And you're
And I was accepted for the UC system, but I just realized at the age I was at, there was no way I was ever going to be able to afford it. My parents weren't paying for it, and I just kind of,
yeah. You're born in 1960, is that correct?
yeah.
60 in New York?
No, my family is all from New York, and I was the only one born in Los Angeles in my family. So I'm a New Yorker, really. I moved to New York at one point in my life, but I'm also like 100% Californian too. I mean, like, Casey Stengel said a lot of crazy stuff, right? Like, or Yogi Berra, these guys say like math things completely wrong that make sense. But
Yeah,
I'm like 100% New Yorker and I'm 100% Californian, if that makes any sense.
it does.
I
It
also
does.
lived in Hawaii and I lived in Omaha, Nebraska, and I lived in San Francisco, LA. So I've been around.
When was the first time you ever heard in your life the term Beach Boys or Brian Wilson?
Probably upon the release of their first record, Surfing. I probably heard that on the radio when
Two.
it was first out. I was old enough to hear the radio. Okay, 1962 is my first year for radio awareness. I remember records from when I was 2 years old. I started reading very slowly, but I was reading when I was 3 years old. So I had brothers and sisters who were like 10 and 12 years older than me. So they like couldn't wait for me to catch up to them, and they were teenagers. So I have this strange thing where there are people who go, you couldn't have been this, you're too young, you're too young. Well, that's because when they were that age, they didn't have that kind of, older brothers or older sisters that could really teach them that stuff.
So you were two and you remember two.
Surf and Safari, look, it came out in 1962. I still have want to see the original 45
Oh
that
yeah,
my
yeah.
sister had? I'll show it to you. Just 1 second. Okay, here it is.
You got receipts.
I got the receipt. No, I actually don't have the receipt, but there it is.
Yeah, wow.
That is my sister's name is Ginny, and it's
Jenny.
right under the name Capitol Records.
Wow.
Okay, and that's the first, But to show you how much we were into the Beach Boys, she also bought 10 Little Indian Boys. Yeah,
Wow.
so we didn't have the Surf and Safari album, but
Uh-huh.
we had, Surf and Safari and 10 Little Indians. And then when Surfing USA came out, my sister bought that. My brother, my sister, and I all played the hell out of it. Like, that album was like on constant rotation. It's still one of my top five favorite Beach Boys albums, along with Pet Sounds, Smile, Friends, and All Summer Long.
Yeah.
So yeah, and then when Surfer Girl came out, my sister bought that album too. So we played the hell out of Surfer Girl Summer of '63, And Surfing USA is a rock and roll album. I often tell people like that album in 1963 on a national breakout level, that was the album that made everybody it was a very fast selling album and it made everybody buy the Beach Boys for the very first time on LP. And that was the beginning of it all. And they associated that album with, you know, what at that time would be considered hard rock. Because if you think about Dick Dale and Miserlou and the way people heard that on the advertisements for Pulp Fiction on TV, I mean, that is a blistering, harder than heavy metal sound. It's just like, and the Beach Boys played Miserlou on their debut album and a bunch of other instrumentals. So I love the surf instrumentals on the album. I realize that they are not as well done as the Surfaris or the Astronauts, okay, or the Lively Ones, but they're still really commendable versions of surf instrumentals, and then they're matched with these great vocal tunes too. So it's really one of my favorite Beach Boys albums to this day, and we played the hell out of it.
First question is going to be a direct question. Out of all the Beach Boys albums, which is your personal favorite?
That would be Smile.
Of course, of course. And for those that don't know, this guy literally wrote the books. And yes, I said books on Smile. We're right here. We have Look, Listen, Vibrate, Smile. Originally published in 1988. Is that correct?
88. Yeah,
88?
in like October of 1988. I published that by myself at a place called Delta Lithograph up in over near Magic Mountain here in LA.
Yeah.
And it sold out within 4 months, and then I did another, I did 2000 in 4 months, another 2000 in like 6 months, and eventually I pressed 7,000 and finally had to give it to Last Gasp of San Francisco, who did all the rest, and it ended up selling 40,000 copies. So it had a big impact in the 1990s on a lot of musician people, because one of the first orders I got was from the manager of the band XTC, who
Yeah.
ordered like 5 copies or something, and everybody in the band got a copy or something like that. So that was kind of the way it went. It was an alternative rock, thing.
For those that don't know, this is been described as the Bible for Smile. For the Beach Boys Smile album. I mean, everything. I mean, you collab pre-internet, every single article, every single magazine, every single everything. How long did that take you?
I think the compilation process took about 6 to 8 months.
6 to 8 months, and this is again, like I said, guys, pre-internet days. So you're probably using like an X-Acto knife and photocopying it.
I still have the X-Acto knife.
Yeah, really.
Yeah. I mean, it's one of them things where, okay, so there was the Paul Williams story in Crawdaddy.
Yes.
There was Jules Siegel's story in Cheetah.
Yeah.
There was also that Teen Set article, Smile, Brian, and Pull Some Strings.
Yes.
And I, was interested in, the basic story we'll probably get to of how I got into Smile. But I mean, I got those articles and I put them all in a loose leaf binder and read straight through. And I think this would make a great book, just these 3 articles, and that's it. And then as I started, somebody told me, well, there's another one that Derek Taylor did in New Musical Express in 1975. That's amazing. And, I ended up finding all these really important pieces like that about Smile, except the only one that didn't get in the book because nobody knew about it until somewhat recently was the lost Michael Vosse interview from 1969, which you're showing right there.
I got this from David Anderley's son, as a matter of fact. This is incredible. I mean, it's in 1969, in Michael Vosse's own words, explaining the whole Smile story. I mean, if someone were to refer to me, like, what's the best article on Smile? I would say Michael Vosse's
You
article.
think that one is? That's interesting because I mean, I think that the Jules Siegel story in Cheetah
Yeah.
is really great, and it's the most important piece. And then that one is probably the most elucidating, one.
Are you ever going to update this?
I
Maybe.
can't. I mean, I would love to, but like Last Gasp of San Francisco at one point just lost interest in pressing it. And weirdly enough, Belinda Wilson asked if I could provide copies for the Smile tour on the merch table. And Last Gasp was so out of it that by that time their owner Ron Turner was getting a bit old and his sons were taking over and they were clueless, and so I lost all that revenue, and so did the Brian's tour.
Yeah. So in addition to Look, Listen, Vibrate, Smile in 88/95, we also have this book,
I love that one.
Law Story of Brian Wilson's Lost Masterpiece, Smile. Forwards by Brian Wilson and Van Dyke Parks. How did you pull that off? That must have been how did you pull
Well,
that?
that does kind of make that book the official word.
Yeah, yeah, and this came out in 2005, of course. And then there's this version right here, which is kind of cool.
Yeah, that was kind of like the cover. They didn't ask. Well, what happened was Sanctuary Publishing in England signed me to the contract. They worked with me on the book, and I got Guy Webster's photograph. Put that cover down. Put it down. Just put it down. Show the other one.
This one.
Because this Guy Webster photograph, it
Uh,
appeared in the Monterey Pop program in 1967, because the Beach Boys were supposed to have been at the Monterey Pop Festival, right? And I must be very clear about this. The people who were putting together the Smile Tour, Melinda and everybody involved, didn't even know who Guy Webster was, you
hmm.
know. And Guy Webster had done all these great photographs for Smile, so I was, associated with Guy Webster through my photo research for Ride on Sunset Strip and whatever else. So I turned them on to Guy Webster, and they used him so much that Guy gave me a really good price for a cover photo, right, on
Yeah.
that book. And then when Sanctuary Publishing sold their book division to some other company, they did something that was illegal, in the fact that my contract says, I have approval over the cover, and they just stuck a contemporary picture of Brian on the cover and took away the Guy Webster shot, and the book ended up getting that version of the book ended up getting remaindered. So I don't know, you might be able to find copies of that one kind of easy, but I think the book had sold about 20,000 copies and was moving really good, and then this other company picked it up, put this lousy picture on the cover that had nothing to do with the 60s and nothing to do with a great artist like Guy Webster, and that killed that book. But it still did sell over 20,000 copies. So
And favorite Beach Boys song of all time. Yours.
it's a tie
Mhm.
between three,
Okay.
and it would be Surfing Safari and Good Vibrations and Surfs Up. And they all touch different things. I mean, Brian Wilson said, Good Vibrations is the biggest production of our lives. And it really was. Although the Smile album was the same exact thing. Good Vibrations it just hit the right spot. You know what I mean? I remember it in the 60s on the radio. It every time I heard it for years later, I might not have heard it for a while, and then I heard it again. It was just like, whoa,
Yeah.
still blows me away. I mean, I can remember times in the early 70s when hadn't heard the Beach Boys music in a while, and suddenly out of nowhere, here's Good Vibrations, and just whoa, you forget just how intense it is if you don't hear it for a while.
Chuck
And
Brooks is quoted as saying, quote, that song was his whole life performance in one song. He wanted it right.
yeah, we got to give it up to that song for that reason. And
Yeah.
again, just how it touched me over the radio is the way it touched everybody over the radio. You just so dynamic that it just does that to people. And I have to say, Surfs Up, I've explained, the lyrics and the eloquence. I mean, Caroline No would have been it, but Surfs Up and Caroline No are so close that Surfs Up takes precedence. And it's still, Caroline No is sort of lurking behind Surfs Up, as the other option of favorite behind Surfs Up. But I have to explain, Surf and Safari is also as much of a favorite to me because I'm primarily a early rock and roll guy. I'm not a progressive rock guy. I am a punk rock guy, and a lounge guy. So the classic rock thing really isn't like my bag. And so I I like Surfing Safari's guitar solo. It's I think Carl Wilson's greatest performance as a guitar player. Okay. It's a great guitar solo. And the lyrics capture the exotic nature of surfing and the appeal of surfing. Because Surfing USA was just a follow-up to Surfing Safari, man.
Yeah.
And Surfing Safari is the bold core thing that made the Beach Boys popular.
Of course, everyone knows Pet Sounds. In fact, UK has it as their number one album of all time.
Mm.
Right.
Yeah.
US has it Sergeant Pepper Pet Sounds. UK has it Pet Sounds Sergeant Pepper. So
Yeah.
yeah,
And Pet, I was just saying to somebody else today, or maybe it was you, that Pet Sounds, I have to be in the right mood, to put on Pet Sounds. So I haven't really played it as much as I've played Surfing USA or Friends,
yeah.
and with Smile, I spent so much time trying to discover what the sequence was that I'm certain I must have listened to Smile more than anything, except for, Surfing USA has been with me since 1963. So there's been a lot of plays there too.
Do you
I was
remember?
6 years old when I first heard God Only Knows, and I remember the first time I heard God Only Knows really clearly. So I live in Los Angeles, right?
Yeah.
And my sister had a bunch of really, like, my sister was dating a surfer,
Oh no.
and she had a bunch of really cool looking 60s girl friends, right? And
Yeah.
I was a little boy who got in the car with like five girls, and I'd be little boys in the middle, crammed with a bunch of girls. It smelled like Coppertone in there. And, we would head down to the beach and all, but we would just sometimes just go with my sister alone. And we go to the beach all the time, right? And a lot of times it was Huntington Beach, which is Huntington and Newport, which were kind of really big surfing beaches. So, and they were down in Orange County, and we lived in East LA, so Orange County was closer to us than like Jan and Dean lived on West LA, so Malibu would be closer to them. See,
Yeah.
uh, so on the way back from Huntington Beach one day, we were driving through where the homes were, and we heard, the beginning of God Only Knows, and we're listening to the song, and I was going, "Wow, this is a cool record." Do you know who it is? My sister, she goes, well, that's the Beach Boys. I went, that's the Beach Boys? He's like, yeah, I had no idea because it didn't sound like their previous records.
Yeah.
And that
Yeah.
was a great thing about, I think I wrote about it in Look, Listen, Everybody Smile about, like when the Beach Boys were making hits in the 60s, every time they made a new record, it was something, a cut above the previous ones as far as production sound. It was always a bit different. It wasn't the same old shit, which is the opposite of what they ended up trying to do once Mike Love took over the band in 1977.
I think it's best summed up in the title of Jill Siegel's article, Goodbye Surfing, Hello God.
Yeah, yeah. So God Only Knows happened that way. And at the end of the year, when Good Vibrations came out, it was such a monster hit right out of the box in LA that, everybody knew that was the Beach Boys. It was just like, okay, we were ready for this. And, I heard Wouldn't It Be Nice, in the summer of 66 too. So it was a big year for the Beach Boys, obviously.
Where were you when you first heard Good Vibrations?
I have no idea. Just ubiquitous. I was probably in Monterey Park, California, where I grew up.
So for those that don't know, where Pet Sounds not been released yet, but Brian is cooking up his life's performance in Good Vibrations. I'm reading this from a David Leaf's book. Quote, at a cost of approximately $50,000 and maybe more, Brian Wilson's work on what he called a pocket symphony, Good Vibrations, stretched out over 6 months, 90 hours of recording tape, and 11 complete versions as he experimented with sounds and musical ideas. 11 complete versions? Is that correct, or what's What's that about?
Yeah,
Yeah,
I don't know. It must have been one of those things where Brian had different tape, like masterings of it. But I don't know and I don't remember what the details of that are. I just kind of consider the final Good Vibration single, there's
yes,
no disruption of Brian's art
yeah,
there. There is disruption of Brian's art after that.
yeah, yeah. It says, quote, there are reports of many completed versions of Good Vibrations, and it says one was even played on a radio documentary in 1976. Which version was that? I mean,
Oh, that was okay. There was a radio special.
mhm,
It was called The Best Summers of Our Lives.
yeah.
And there was some kind of an early mix down of Good Vibration that appeared on that radio show. But what people forget is that the closing credits of that radio show also had another mix down of Good Vibrations that was like, played underneath the credits. So, I don't know. It's just like that was heard in 1976 on the radio.
Have those been released or no?
There's a bootleg single of that. It's a really long time ago. And yes, it is on the Smile box set.
That's right. That's right. That's right. I was just making sure that that was it.
Yeah,
So,
but it's part of a larger thing. Would you like to see the bootleg 45?
sure. Yeah.
Okay, hold on.
Okay, sure.
Now, I'm pretty sure that this single on Randy Records,
Mhm.
Good Vibrations, it says live by the Beach Boys.
Uh-huh.
And so that's it. I mean, I think what they did with this record was they took the Best Summers of Our Lives version
Mhm.
and went ahead and repressed it. It's a bootleg, 45.
Yeah.
How cool is this?
So 5 days before Pet Sounds is released, uh, a session is held on May 11th, 1966. Heroes and Villains. Very early session. It's now missing. So Pet Sounds has come out. People are going, "What? Wow! What's going on here? This is cool. This is different." Beach Boys are going in a new direction. Brian is working on his Pocket Symphony to God. Good Vibrations. Good Vibrations is finally released, and people don't know, but this is just a preview. I'm speaking to the audience here. This is a preview, just a tiny taste, a sample of what's to come, which is Brian Wilson's masterpiece. And originally he was going to call it, as Michael Vossi said, Dumb Angel, but he told Michael Vossi that actually the real title is called Smile.
Yeah,
So, which brings us to this entire interview. So, Dom, if someone were to say, "What is Smile?" How do you even begin to answer that question?
I would tell them to buy the box set and read my liner notes.
Yes, yes,
but the bottom line is, uh, you know, I think it was Brian finally coming to terms with Bob Dylan, right? He got Van Dyke Parks to help him write the lyrics. And there's one of those things where the Beatles came to terms with Bob Dylan already with I'm a Loser, you know. Like as we all know, the Beatles were at the Delmonico Hotel in 1964, and Bob Dylan came up and turned them on to marijuana, cigarette. And
yeah,
Paul went around writing notes in a little notebook, thinking everything was perfectly genius, And it's a funny story, but the bottom line is, the Beatles started to take on with I'm a Loser the more deeper lyrics. And then when Rubber Soul finally came out, we saw, a full album of that type of, deeper thinking in the words, but still Beatlesque music. And it should also be said that the Byrds had a major uh, influence on Rubber Soul because, you know, even the album cover of Mr. Tambourine Man with its fisheye lens cover, right? And Bringing It All Back Home also had a fisheye lens album cover by Bob Dylan. So the Beatles end up having, the fisheye lens cover of Rubber Soul, but they are also standing in the forest as the Birds were, and they're wearing suede. There was this big suede presence. I believe John Lennon is wearing that suede, and the Birds are, also wearing a lot of suede on the Tambourine Man album, which came out before Rubber Soul by a lot of months. So those influences of Bob Dylan and the Birds, you know, Brian lives in Los Angeles, remember, and the Sunset Strip was really, really changing the course of music history in 1965. In fact, my follow up to Look, Listen, Vibrate, Smile is called Ride on Sunset Strip, Rock and Roll's Last Stand in Hollywood. And that book is an offshoot of Look, Listen, Vibrate, Smile, because in Look, Listen, Vibrate, Smile, I have a few pages in there from Tom Nolan's article, The Frenzied Frontier of Pop.
Yeah.
And that is where I start feeling, oh, there's more to this than just Beach Boys, Beach Boys, Beach Boys, Beach Boys, or
Yes.
Brian, 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 Brian. This is Brian as part of a music scene that also involves the Byrds, Frank Zappa and the Mothers of Invention, the Doors, Love, Buffalo Springfield. I mean, you know, Brian Wilson is not like, in the center of the universe on top of the world with no other peers in LA in 1965, 1966. He's absorbing these new groups. And, he went down to the Trip to go see the Love and Spoonful. He went to the Whiskey A Go Go to go see the Turtles. I don't remember or know every show Brian went to. He supposedly wasn't really into going out, but he did go out and he went to go see groups. I got a picture of him backstage at the Hullabaloo Club at an Everly Brothers show in the Smile Book. So, he went out and he was seeing groups and, he wasn't, you know, on some island by himself. He was being influenced by Bob Dylan, the Byrds, and things like that.
So like again, going back to Vossi's article, Michael Vossi said, quote, I would say that Smile, had it been completed, would have been basically a Southern California, non-country oriented gospel album on a very sophisticated level, because that's what he was doing, his own form of revival music. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, and the rhythm and blues tracks that he uses, like G and so on, like those have the spirit of gospel in them as well. Um, I'm not a big fan of gospel music or anything to do with religion, any world religion,
Yeah.
any new age or anything. I really what I call it mystical mumbo jumbo. Okay, but in the case of Smile, um, it's different because he talks about real things in there, like earth, air, fire, water, you know. And good vibrations is that. Those are real things. I think Brian was a lot more grounded uh than a lot of the mystical mumbo jumbo people out there, so to speak. As a matter of fact, when I did the Smile book, the very first edition, it went out. I put this in there. And what this is it's a little packet that has a matchbook
Uh-huh.
from Bob's Big Boy.
Oh, really?
Now
Yeah.
Bob's Big Boy was the cruising, the main cruising drive-in kind of place in the LA area during the 60s, right?
Yeah.
So, but I also packed in with it a cone of incense. Now, you
Yeah.
got the cone of incense and you got the Bob's Big Boy matches. And I think really this is where Smile's at. Like Brian is a very grounded, down to earth, normal, like cool SoCal youth of the 50s and 60s who went to cruising and drive-in and made the album, records about surfing and stuff. But here's some incense. And this is representing, like just the carnal version of things and the existential, you know, you light a cone of incense and you sit down and you concentrate more. And I think, it's a way of Brian sort of, being who he was, but then sort of intellectualizing it in a way that where both things can come together. I mean, Pet Sounds, I know he felt that he missed the mark in some way because it wasn't popular. And he wanted his next album to be a lot more, readily available, not elitist, so to speak. Not that he set out to be elitist in Pet Sounds, but it was such a, a personal album and so high-minded that he wanted the next one to be a lot more bouncy and a lot more fun. So the humor and all that stuff kind of goes in with the down-to-earth who Brian Wilson was in the 50s, really. And then the other thing is this learning existential part of himself that, existentialism isn't BS New Age stuff. It's real, like Donovan's song, The Universal Soldier,
Oh yeah,
is just a reprinting of existentialism. If we all don't, sign up for the army, then maybe, and, the wars will end. Because you have to make a decision in life. Are you going to be the person who signs up to, shoot other people or not? You know, I mean, those decisions are really you. And so existentialism isn't bullshit, isn't new age, and isn't religion. It's real stuff. You just got to, read, you know.
exactly. What was the message that Brian was trying to send to the world in 1967?
Well, I think the lyrics that Van Dyke put on the end of Surf's Up, the one we hear in 1971, a children's song and the message that they play.
Mhm.
The song is love, and the children know the way. Child is father to the man.
Yeah,
That's the most important part of Smile. These are not, airy fairy, high and pie in the sky things. These are really true. Like the young, what he was really getting across was that, like, look, he's a senior member of. By 1966, Brian Wilson is already really an established, rock and roll entity, and the bands that were coming up, like Love and the Birds, were brand new. So
yeah,
he's already a veteran, by 1966, believe it or not, in the short-lived time. Because in those days, a pop act lasted 2 or 3 years and then they were done, and now the Beach Boys have been going on for like 5 or 6 years, so well, 5 years, and that's a long time for that kind of pop success. So, you just wanted to kind of, keep that going, but also advance it into the new consciousness. We had a time when entering the Vietnam War, the whole Gulf of Tonkin bullshit that Johnson
yeah,
put over and convinced America to go to war.
yeah,
And in 1965 in Los Angeles, we already had the very first anti-war demonstrations that were put on by the guys at the Ferris Gallery on La Cienega, the Ed Ruscha, Wallace Berman, Billy Al Bankston, Ed Keenholz, those major artists. Those are the people who put on the very first Andy Warhol show at Ferris Gallery in La Cienega. So we were a really aware place, and they were holding the very first protests against the Vietnam War in earnest in 1965. This is what was going on, and so the Pet Sounds was an album about love. That was about personal love and all that kind of thing.
yeah,
But now we're taking it like to the, hey man, you know, raise your level of consciousness. Don't be a dumb shit. And try to understand life is more important than just following along, with what people are telling you to do, and actually like see higher, seek higher. The 60s were, you know, a really important time because it was about 100 years between the Civil War
mhm,
and the Civil Rights Bill passing.
yeah.
100 years
Rules.
of, black people not really being free,
Mhm.
and they're really, in a way, they're still not free,
Yeah,
because they're still up against it. It's just like incremental improvements. The Civil Rights Bill was a beginning,
yeah,
and that is the thing that changes culture in the 60s all the way,
yeah.
not just a Vietnam War problem.
I think that's a great way to put what Smile was. Van Dyke Parks famously said, "What was Smile?" He said it was an American Gothic trip, man. And that's also true. Or at least the first half, you know what I mean? The first side one of the album.
Well, yeah, and he uses, that to show Manifest Destiny.
Uh,
Like the whole thing with Andrew Jackson and the Trail of Tears,
yeah.
and real American history is being, alluded to in Smile.
Yeah.
Cabin Essence, the frontier of the range, how this land was settled,
Yeah.
and they always, Van Dyke especially talks about how we were in competition with the Beatles. We
Yeah.
had they, or I think competition means more, they wanted to completely stay in the idiom that was happening in the 60s. And the Beatles were definitely like leading the pack.
Mhm.
And the Beach Boys, and the Rolling Stones, they weren't going to be like, even though they were second banana to the Beatles, they weren't going to be left behind by the Beatles. They were going to stay at the same level of quality and importance that the Beatles were, album by album creating.
Yeah.
And again, once again, Bob Dylan was the singular architect of that kind of social consciousness in music during that time, which was necessary for that time because of all these things that were happening. The other thing was the fact that in 1962, the year of Surf and Safari, we had this major nuclear crisis.
Yeah.
The Cuban Missile Crisis happens in 1962,
Mhm.
and these are things that
Most dangerous day in the history of humankind.
yeah. Yeah, the Civil Rights Bill, the Cuban Missile Crisis, and the first time we really entered a war like the Vietnam War, where we really shouldn't have been in. Okay, some people think we shouldn't have been in the Spanish American War either, but that's another story.
David Anderle said, quote, Smile was going to be the culmination of all of Brian's intellectual occupations.
Yeah, Brian was kind of going through all of like this is really covered well in David Leaf's book, Better Than Mine,
Yeah.
because that's the kind of stuff where Brian was getting into all of the different kinds of metaphysical trends of the 60s, but he was sort of consuming them and dropping them, consuming
Yeah.
them and dropping them. Because like usually people who get into those things, they jump on a one thing and they stay with that one thing. Brian wanted to learn them all. He
Yeah.
was, it's a matter of just understanding the diversity of all these theories,
Yeah.
you know,
Exactly. Exactly.
and all that gets into the music in a way.
Exactly.
He's raising his level of consciousness.
Exactly.
He wanted to, be a part of those kinds of bands who are also raising the level of consciousness of the young generation at that time, be it Bob Dylan or the Doors or Love or the Byrds or, I mean, that's where Brian needed to be.
Yeah. So the first session for Smile happens uh 2 months before Good Vibrations is released on October 10th, 1966. So August 3rd, 1966, Brian enters the studio and he starts Wind Chimes.
There you go. Good place to start.
And then on August 12th, 1966, Look, also known as Song for Children, was recorded in one take, right? In one take. Well,
Yeah, I
it was
guess
it was take 20 for my notes, but that's
that's the kind of record that could be done in a day. You hire the kinds of
yeah,
musicians, you give them the
exactly.
notes, and they
Exactly.
go down, and that's it. That's all they needed.
Now vocals were recorded for that, but they were lost. Is that right? For Look.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know what happened to those.
Yeah, but Look was complete. It was done. It was recorded. It took 20 takes, but it got done. You know what I mean? So okay, so August 25th, 1966. Wonderful is recorded. The
Mm.
best.
The wonderful that I consider the wonderful is the one that's on the Good Vibrations box set.
You're just ahead.
There you go.
Yeah,
That's the wonderful that,
and
you know,
Wonderful was finished. It was also finished.
sure.
And it was released on here. It exists because it's on here. And you can listen to Brian's actual mix on the bootlegs. I mean, people don't realize this. The finished Wonder. Who was it that said like that was a demo or something? That the finished
Yeah, David Leaf once told me that he thought it was a demo.
Oh, bro, oh yeah. So, but
So
it,
that
it
just shows you, like again, I'm more of the practical,
yeah,
what happened at the sessions and what is a complete version, tape for tape.
and then it was changed in the 2011 box set. The horns were,
Oh God.
but that's the thing. They released like the finished Wonderful on here, the finished Wind Chimes on here, the finished Dada on here, the finished, Worms on here, but then they effed with them in 2011 and they didn't release them in the box set. So it's like we have to go all the way back over here. First of all, thank God that they got released here, period, because this
I
is
know.
this is all that
Yeah.
all that they exist on. But it's like you think that the original versions would be on another disc or on one of the discs, but it's like no. So it's like it's all a bunch of luck. Like thank God that it was on here. We can get everything here and we can put things together. You know what I mean?
Okay, I have the reason. I know the reason for that.
All right, yeah.
You're gonna love this.
All right. What?
Okay. Okay. You know what the thinking is we've got to have stuff on this box set that nobody's heard before,
Yeah.
right? We got to have stuff on this box set that the bootleggers don't have. So it's always so by the time of the 2011 box set compared to the Good Vibrations box set, the goal is to impress people and be ahead of people by giving them something they can't get anywhere else. So
Mhm.
therefore, they give you all these weird, freaky like mixes of shit, from the master tapes because they have the reels and the bootleggers don't. So the bottom line is, they want to release something and have the public say, or the fans or the geeks say, "Oh, I already have that." So basically, the correct smile doesn't come out, because we've got to, outdo the bootleggers, which is also bullshit.
Next is September 1st, 1966. He gives speeches. Now, of course, it's the original concept of She's Going Bald, for those that don't know, from Smiley Smile. He gives speeches was left off of the 2004 concert and the 2011 sequence.
Yeah, but it's more of an introduction to Wonderful, kind of.
How
If
did
you
you?
listen to the words.
Yeah, I heard you say that in another interview how he gives speeches goes before Wonderful. How did you figure that out? It also
It
sounds
was,
like,
it was one of those things, it was like kind of an obvious one.
yeah, you hear them back to back. He gives speeches and then Wonderful, and it's like that makes sense. That
Well,
does,
not only musically, but the words do too.
yeah.
The words to He Gives Speeches end up talking about a situation that Wonderful kind of elaborates better on.
I never really thought about that. Then, yeah, that's amazing.
Yeah, well, that's the thing. Again, you got to follow the words too, right?
That's such a good point. That's such a good point.
I mean, not only do you like follow musical notation like this bass line in Child of the Father Man leans to this other part of Child of the Father Man, things like that, but there's also like listen to what the song is saying and listen to what the words are saying. I mean, in this case, that's it.
So he gives speeches, of course, was finished on that day.
Yeah.
September 8th is a holidays that was done. Take four was the master take, and that's it. Holidays that was finished, right?
Yeah. And
And
it's great. I mean, it's great.
what
That's a really great. I mean, those Look and Holidays are great, are fantastic.
and as we said,
They're wonderful.
vocals for Look were recorded on uh, October 13th, 1966, but those are now missing. But
Are they missing? Because I remember hearing child, child, like this little child is father of the man type stuff on it.
I thought they just pulled that for. It's not on the original. It's on the 2011. They had the cha cha cha. To do,
Yeah.
they took
There's
that.
some chanting there. I don't know where that came from. I don't know.
Maybe that came from Charlie's Father of the Man, and they just flew those in. I don't know. I don't really
I
care.
don't know. I don't know.
I
They
don't.
maybe found the tapes that
I
maybe
like.
nobody knew they were missing, dude. I
I like
mean, maybe somebody sometimes said they were missing and actually they weren't.
that.
Who knows?
But vocals for
Mark
Look.
Lynette might know.
But vocals for Look, according to the record, were recorded, but they're missing. But that's just something we'll have to live with. Unfortunately,
I don't know. I like what was done with that.
2011. Yeah,
Sounds fantastic. It sounds good without the vocals too.
Yeah, it does. So holidays, there were, correct me if I'm wrong, there weren't supposed to be any vocals for holidays originally, right?
No,
Now the vocals that, yeah, I thought so. Now the vocals that are on the 2004 concert version, um,
Van Dyke Parks came in for Brian Wilson Presents Smile, right?
yeah,
And finished like finished. I don't know about that. I mean, I don't know. You don't to me, you don't touch a piece of art that was recorded in 1966 and finish it in 2012 or something or whatever. I mean,
but
whatever BPS. I don't know. Like in Blue Hawaii. I mean,
yeah,
who dislike it? I mean, I don't dislike it or anything. I'm just saying I'm not into In Blue in as far as Smile goes. I'm not into In Blue Hawaii.
yeah.
I'm a huge Hawaiian music fan. Okay, I like the song In Blue Hawaii on its own, but as a part of the original
Oh,
Smile,
absolutely. But like the original idea for holidays was just supposed to be no vocals, right?
yeah, it's no, yeah, And by the way, I want to say something about instrumentals.
Yep, yeah,
Again, my favorite, one of my three or four or five favorite Beach Boys albums is Surfing USA. Brian cut instrumentals on almost every Beach Boys album,
yeah.
from all the way up to well, not just Brian, but even Bruce with Nearest Faraway Place. So all the way to throughout the '60s, there was always some kind of an instrumental. As a matter of fact, right here I have the Japanese CD
Uh-huh.
called "The Beach Boys Instrumental Hits."
And that's the thing. And you made a point about this in Look, Listen, Vibrant, Smile and your second Smile book, how people expect there to be vocals on every single Beach Boys song.
Yes,
People,
that's a mistake
yeah,
right there.
like,
People go, I got to hear vocals on everything because it's the
like,
Beach Boys and they're a great vocal group. Well, what about Stack of Tracks?
yeah, it's
I
like,
mean, Brian's okay. Look, Brian's real talent is his arrangements.
yes, yeah,
Whether it's his vocal arrangements or his instrumental arrangements, the instrumental arrangements behind the vocals, the vocal arrangements on top of his instrumental arrangements
yeah,
become are those are the things that are endlessly fascinating about the music. And I think anybody listening to this who's a Beach Boys fan, you know, would have to agree to that. His arrangements. Now, when you get to hear Brian's instrumental tracks of things that have vocals on them without the vocals, it's mind blowing, you
yeah,
know, and that's why Stack of Tracks was such a cool album. And that's why, the Smile box set's so cool because you get to hear Cabin Essence without any singing on it or whatever. And Cabin Essence without any singing on it is fantastic. It's
yeah.
like everything is so dense and so layered.
So fantastic. It was released on here.
Yeah, and by the way, I want to show you one more thing, okay? Okay, you ready?
Yeah, let's see.
Okay, so for example, there's this album from Japan. It's from the '60s, okay? It's called The Beach Boys Instrumental Hits. Now, you got to remember that in Japan, right, there's, something of a language barrier.
Yeah,
Uh, and one of the most, I mean, popular groups in Japan that came from America was the Ventures.
yeah,
Okay. The Ventures were huge in Japan. They made a movie in Japan called Beloved Invaders, right?
yeah,
So this was a natural to come out in Japan, right? And a lot of people haven't seen this, but it's a whole LP of all songs,
yeah.
that were part of the instrumental thing that the Beach Boys were into.
Wow. I
So
mean,
you might see some titles there, but anyways, the bottom line, it's a really rare album.
and
And
that's
like picture on the back and on the front, it has this sort of almost summer days and summer nights kind of picture. But I mean, the instrumental textures of the Beach Boys are also very, very important. You
and
know, they're Brian's arrangements at their best.
yeah. I mean, I mean, not a single vocal of Smile was put on the tape until 2 months into the recording sessions.
Yeah.
Well, October. They started in August and October, so he's focusing solely on the music. lyrics are written, sure, but he's putting all this in. He's doing all these instrumentals. I mean, again, people expect vocals to be on every single thing, which is fine. But especially if you hear an album like that where it's instrumental, it's like, oh, I never heard that before. Oh, you appreciate it more.
Well, I want to say this about, the vocals only tracks that have come out on a lot of the recent Beach Boys things. I mean, fans like them,
Uh,
but I really personally think they're a waste of time because there's a lot of really great Beach Boys outtakes that are still not out. And here we got to hear these vocals only things, Hey, you know what? Just listen to your record closer. Those vocals are all there. You don't really get that much extra from hearing it without the backing track. I just think it's a waste of space when songs like Gonna Hustle You are
yeah,
not out. Witch Stand, they don't even bother to find that, and it's the Survivors, but still, it's Brian Wilson, 1964, his biggest hit making period. And they don't bother to drag that up from wherever it is. So there's a lot of important Beach Boys albums that are or songs that are still in the can, demos that are still in the can, things that we haven't heard
they
that are
digitized or
great.
they digitized or no?
Yeah, well, Malibu Sunset is one of my very favorite Beach Boys songs.
Yeah,
It's not even a Beach Boys song. I think Glenn Campbell and Brian sing that or something. But the bottom line is, I mean, why have a vocals only track when you have so many great unreleased Beach Boys tracks that are not out?
I think the
Waste of
only
time.
I think the only two bands in history where you can remove everything but the vocals, if you just have the vocals remain and nothing changes of the essence of the song, I can only think of the Beatles and the Beach Boys. I mean, if you take
And more so the Beach Boys.
oh, absolutely, it's
More so the Beach Boys, because the Beach Boys backing tracks, Brian, I mean, utilized the Wrecking Crew
yeah.
better than anybody. And I mean, Phil Spector, Jack Nitzsche, I love them. I love their records. A lot of times I love them as much as the Beach Boys, you know what I mean? But it's just the dynamics that Brian did and the songwriting and the arrangement talent that takes him a notch above even Phil Spector and Jack Nitzsche.
It's like they finally released Surf's Up vocals only what 4 years ago on the Phil Flows box set, and it's like I listened to it and I'm like, it doesn't. I mean, yeah, the backing track isn't there, but I'm like, it still captures everything. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's just like nothing's missing. It's like I said, the only two bands I can think of in history that you can do that with are the Beach Boys and the Beatles. Speaking of vocals, Our Prayer started on September 19th, 1966, but it was cut short because as Brian was made aware while they were recording that the Good Vibrations master went missing, and he bolted out of the studio, and then he found it at his house. But then it was lost later on. We'll get there. We'll get there. So okay, so October.
Wow. I didn't even know that chronology and sequence of the missing tape.
Oh, really? Yeah, yeah. So he found he's like tour. Where is it? Where's it? Oh, he found it in his house. But then it got lost again. So it's just still lost to this day. So the eight track, eight track, right? Eight track. Yeah,
Yeah. Well, Brian was recording an 8 track
yeah.
for Pet Sounds. So yeah.
That was the eight track. So October comes around. Cabin Essence is recorded all in one day. The
Wow.
banjo verse, the waltz chorus, and the Grand Coulee tag. So that's all done in one day. And that's another thing I had. I was like, because there could have, Smilers and all these pieces, and we have no idea which take would have been, you can assemble the puzzle however you want. It's like, no, like I just read, like the banjo verse was take 12, that was the master take. Waltz chorus, take 23, the Grand Coulee tag was take 5. It's all there. So then I wondered, well, did those backing tracks always have titles on the tape boxes? And Mark Lynette was like, yeah, yeah. They always had names from the beginning. So,
I can't tell you about all the tape boxes. I was with Alan Boyd
or is it
when we first mixed the vegetable things. He showed me the note Brian's notes for vegetables. So that's why I know so well about that. And that the fact that there was 9 edits on it.
we'll get we'll get there. So I guess the question is it possible that the music of what became Cabanescence, the banjo verse, the waltz chorus, the grand coulee tag, is it possible that that was just music on its own before it was given the name Cabanescence, or was that always Cabanescence? Or did they say on
I think with what you're talking about now is there were titles going around like Home on the Range.
yeah, yeah, yeah,
But
yeah.
but you know, again, these are just working titles.
I call it the banjo verse, but that's the home on the
Yeah,
range.
when
Yeah,
you got all these things, you got to kind of depict them somehow.
but
And then you put it together in the big picture.
I'm forgetting on the Cabanescence tracking on the box set during the tracking session. Do they say Cabanescence in there? Like a Cabanescence take, or do they just say?
I don't know. I don't remember.
I'll have to insert. I'll have to put a little note at the bottom if that's true.
Yeah.
But Mark Lynette told me that if, from what he remembers, they always had titles because in the Beautiful Dreamer documentary, David Angeli was like, "Oh, Brian would take home these acetates of the music that he recorded from the day, and he's like, okay, is this wonderful? Okay, this is wonderful. This is Cabanescence." It's like, "Oh no, Brian, that sounds perfect as one." Remember that scene? So I was like, "Well, wait a minute. If they always had titles, then why is Brian like changing the names of the songs?" So it's like a little bit of a hodgepodge there. But anyway,
I don't know. That's the airy fairy stuff coming in that I
I
don't
know, I
understand.
know. Okay, so
I mean, Mike Love, also kind of thought it was airy fairy, and at some level, those guys were.
yeah. Okay,
But
so
I mean, I'm a little bit more, Bo Diddley, Chuck Berry.
mm,
I'm not Grateful Dead.
yeah. Very interestingly, in David Leaf's book, he says that there were, quote, 25 different mixes and combinations of Cabanescence.
Mm.
Um, I read that and I was like, I don't that doesn't sound right. What do you think?
I've heard some different ones. I don't know how many there really are. They were rough early things.
Yeah,
So again, it's like Surf's Up, where Cabin Essence gets finished in 1968.
yeah.
Simple.
Everything, yeah, everything was there except for the Home on the Range vocals. I got the full quote right here. It says, quote, 25 different mixes and combinations of Cabanescence had been pressed on acetate discs before the group settled on the version they released. Now, I've often wondered how this could be possible because only three sections were recorded: the verse, the chorus, and the tag.
Yeah, but you know what that sounds like to me? That sounds like he's working on it to try to. He brings a hat. Look, he
Yeah,
can cut it. Look at he can cut an acetate every single day.
yeah,
He can cut an acetate at a couple times, in a day. He's like, okay, how does this sound? Let's do another. Let's keep on working. Okay, and then cut another acetate the same day. So it's not really 28 different versions. It's more like he's working through it and looking for things. I'm guessing that's more like what it would be.
I guess so.
That's a guess.
I guess maybe because, like I said, there were only three sections were recorded. Math says that you can only have seven combinations with three things, not 25. So it's like I don't know. I'm
I've
getting.
never heard 25, so I don't know, man.
I don't. Yeah. Anyway. Okay. So October was a big. October 66 was a huge month for Smile recording. Okay. So the next day on October 4th, 1966, Our Prayer is recorded in four separate pieces. And Brian makes his edit and it's done. It's done. It's done. Then it was eventually released on 2020 in
Yeah,
1960. But interestingly, if you listen to Brian's original mix, the second to last
you
piece.
figured that out, didn't you? Of course. Yeah, and you're right. Don't ask me where that comes from.
So, do we take that out, or does it just leave it?
No,
I
no, I don't.
know,
I don't care.
but if
It's
you listen to
probably from the
Brian,
original. I don't think they went in the studio like in 1960 and went like one more time. I don't
they
think
just
it's
used.
probably from a tape somewhere. It got used.
but it's like, oh, we also did that one. Let's put that in, even though it wasn't in
I
the
don't know. I don't know. It's
right.
quite that's
But it's
you caught a piece of minutia that I've been aware of for a long time. And yeah, I mean,
it's
I don't I think it's probably an original Smile tape too.
yeah, it's Brian's actual mix, and but whenever it just we're so used to hearing the that extra piece, it's like without it, it's like something's missing. But anyway, okay. So the next day, October 5th, 1966, Wind Chimes is continued, and they did the marimba verse and the music box tag. Now, Michael Vossi describes in beautiful detail the that music box ending, which was removed for the 2004 concert and 2011 box set. Even though the song was finished and released on here, finally we heard what Michael, for those who read Michael Vossi's article, it's the finished wind chimes is on here, and then they bastardized it into why would they do
I
that?
don't know.
I mean, that's in
I don't know, dude. Hey, you want to hear another one like that?
there.
Okay. Okay. So Can't Wait Too Long, which isn't really a Smile song. But there's this like bass part that goes dung 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 with a big echo and everything. And then and it fades.
Hmm.
When they released Can't Wait Too Long, where the fuck was that? I,
Yeah,
where the fuck was the bass part? God damn it.
I know.
I mean, what are you going to do?
I know.
I mean, at least we have it right.
Yeah.
Vaffanculo.
All right. So
That's Italian.
I oh I know. So 2 days later, October 7th, 1966, Child is Father of the Man starts. They do a verse and a chorus, but both of them end up not being used. So 4 days later, they continue it and they do the horn chorus, the verse, and the ominous piano bridge. And but the vocals for Child is Father of the Man were recorded um, on October 12th, December 2nd, and December 6th. All of them are missing. They don't exist anymore. They only survive on monoacetates. Monoacetates.
Well, if they exist on monoacetates, then they exist.
Well, I mean, they don't.
What's happening with this particular song, Child is Part of the Man? I remember this being originally uh, coming in on a tape that Kurt Betcher gave to me, and it was edited together.
Mhm.
And then I heard a tape of it where the bass part and everything was separate. So Child is Part of the Man was kind of a bit in pieces. And it's one of those things that, like, I'm not going to say that the first tape Kurt Betcher gave to me was the best, but I mean, to me, that was the one that I heard that sounded like
Yeah.
exactly what Brian would have done. And I think it might have just been a transitional piece of music that became, was an introduction to Surf's Up, in a way.
Yeah. Um,
It doesn't have to be a full song, just like
absolutely.
it doesn't have to have all vocals on it,
And,
whatever.
and Van
And
Dyke,
about these lost vocals you're talking about, if they do exist on an acetate, they're there. But also,
I meant to,
like,
I meant to
my feeling
say,
is that maybe such lost vocals are actually in a mix on a tape somewhere that we are already hearing and we don't know it.
to me, Child is Father of the Man held a big mystery for me until I realized that Brian had actually cut a 3 minute track of it with no vocals at all, no backing vocals at all, nothing. And that was not released on the 2011 box set. And it was not
Where
released.
is it?
It's on the Wake the World uh, box set.
Yeah, that's right. Some of
Actually,
that stuff is buried
actually,
elsewhere.
it's not. It wasn't on any of the bootlegs. It's something that no one had until 20. No one heard until 2018. Brian's actual mix, 3 minute mix of Child is Father of the Man. And Mark Lynette said, yeah, everyone was complaining to him to release it. And then they just said, well, we'll release it on the Wake the World box set because that turned into Little Bird, you know what I mean? The song. So it's like, so there we find, but it sounds like it's not remastered or anything. It just sounds like someone just put the acetate or reel and just digitized it quickly and said, slapped it on and said, okay, it's out there. It's not, it's not, what they did with the original Wonderful.
Right, right. But okay, let me just say something about the Beach Boys archive. There's a lot of tapes. There's a lot of work. And
Yeah.
if they cut corners doing that, it's because, time's running out
So
in that
event,
project.
yeah. So some fan on YouTube actually constructed it how it's actually supposed to be. They construct
Oh,
using the box set, the high quality chorus, verse, and piano bridge,
yeah.
and then got the vocals from the monoacetates. So it's very convoluted. Since the vocals only survive on the monoacetates, I assume that Mark Lynette isolated those and then put them into the 2011 Bach sequence on disc one. You see what I mean?
Yes.
Put them
I
there.
gotta say, at this point,
Yeah.
like your whole spiel that you're talking here, it's an example of why, there needs to be another Smile release.
Yes, exactly. So the fan took the high quality again bridge, verse, and chorus, and took those vocals from the CD one and make finally made it complete as it should have been. Hasn't been released. Some fan on YouTube had to do it. So to me, I think that's like the one big thing that has not been released. Some,
Okay.
huh?
All
Some
right. Yeah, I agree. I mean, yeah,
had to do
you've
it.
done the research, you've done the contemporary research here.
Yeah.
With all the information that's out there, I mean, in doing Look, Listen, Vibrate, Smile,
Yeah.
and in my research with, the tape, finding the tapes, from my source, Kurt Betcher, and, the same one that was Lindsey Buckingham's source, and then bringing it to Jerry and Nick in 1984,
Yeah.
and all those things, we did a lot of pioneering work. And now there's even more stuff that's like, become available. And you have just done that kind of research with what you're telling me.
I try my best.
You did the same kind of research that Darian and I were doing with Nick in 84. Nothing less.
Try to. I try my
And I
best.
respect the fans that actually do that and find something that is,
Yeah.
accurate, and they don't make up their own shit, and they're trying to get as close as they can to what Brian did.
Yeah.
The point is to
And
try to find out what like what Brian did and what was the best version of what Brian did.
the
Because
extent.
Brian didn't know what the best version of what he did. Because let's face it, Brian goes into the studio in January or something, and he starts February or something, 67, and starts
Yeah.
recutting Heroes and Villains after he'd already cut a much better version.
And
You know,
wonderful.
oh, I didn't, like Brian didn't even always know at some point what was the best version. So we have to find. I mean, Brian was overtaxed, man.
He was
He
doubting
created
himself.
all this. He made the music, but then the assemblage was overtaxing here.
He was doubting himself. He started having doubts. And he
Well,
started.
but he had the doubts because of all the things that, like friction he got from Mike Love from Capitol Records, then the lawsuit, ba boom, ba boom, ba boom, it's over.
Yeah. So 6 days later, a demo for Vegetables is done. The cornucopia version is what it's called. Is that right?
Okay.
The demo.
Wait. That's the next one after Child is Father of the Man.
Yeah. Child's Father Man is on 10/11, and then 10/17 is the Vegetables.
He doesn't vegetables that early.
Yeah, yeah, it's a demo.
Yeah, okay,
Yeah,
that's right. Okay.
yeah, demo that early. I know. And then the next day we get my favorite, one of probably my favorite. Do You Like Worms starts on 10/18, October 18th, 1966. The Everything was recorded that day. The verse, the harpsichord chorus that was later not used, the Hawaiian part, and the tack piano chorus, all in one day. Beautiful. People don't know that Do You Like Worms was finished. So I'm just very glad that Do You Like Worms is on here, with the false ending and all that stuff. Because,
Right.
okay, so 2 days later, on October 20th, 1966, Heroes and Villains is born. They record the verse and Barnyard in the Barnyard section. And that is just like all that is recorded for Heroes and Villains in 1966.
Oh,
So I'm like the that's like the main song of the album, and it's like, okay, so
not the main song of the
one
album.
of, well, one of them, but
Okay.
here,
But that single,
yeah, 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 yeah. But okay, so the album was originally supposed to be. I didn't know this until a few years ago, but the album Smile was originally supposed to be released in December of 1966. Is that correct? That's crazy. Because
it wasn't going to be ready by then, though.
I know, but that's crazy because all they had for Heroes and Villains, again, one of the main songs was the verse and Barnyard.
Okay, but remember, Billboard magazine had the
Yeah.
ad. I believe it was in December issue, and there was also in stores a Christmas display of
Yep.
coming Capitol albums that had the Smile album cover on it, which no one seems to have. That promotional display is lost. It's like trying to get a copy of the Beach Boys Potato Chips from the Party album.
Well, no wonder it couldn't. Probably a big factor that it missed its deadline was because Heroes and Villains it was just only 5% started.
Correctamundo.
Okay, so and then a week later, I'm in great shape is recorded. That took 37 takes to get right. 37 takes for I'm in great shape. But yeah, but it comes before Barnyard. I'm in great shape. No, no, no.
You
Here.
know how takes are. Like that's a jazz piece where he's playing the horn.
Yep.
And I mean, he probably had to stop many, 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 many times.
Yeah. Yeah.
So take two, oh, take three, you fucked up, take four. So like maybe 10 takes could have been like just, and then trying to find it, trying to find the feel. I mean, that 37 takes is not really a lot of takes. It could be like a take could be like 2 seconds and a fuck up. So, big deal.
Now, a week earlier, it says that vocals were done for I'm in great shape that are now missing. So, that's just something we'll have to
Well, that's too bad because the only thing we really have on Brian's Van Dyke's lyrics is
demo.
the piano demo, okay, and that piano demo is really the key. It's an important piece now because if all the other stuff is lost, then one would have to use. Um, Actually, Alan Boyd and I made an edit where we used the demo and the track, the demo and the track back to back spliced together so that it's more of you're sampling it and listening to you're aware that you're listening to an unfinished piece of music. It's the only the Barnyard and I'm in great shape are a part of Heroes and Villains that is an unfinished piece of music, perhaps because a recording was lost. Okay, but all we have left is the lyrics on the demo
Yeah.
and then the backing tracks, which can be heard back to back,
Mhm.
but not as a complete song. And I feel that's all right.
Yeah.
It's all right. Like, okay, let me talk to you about Wild Hallucinations at Capitol Records. They think the same way about the Beatles. Well, that's not a finished piece of music. They don't want to put out outtakes because it's not a finished piece of music. But actually, like, so the bootleggers get to release it all, right?
Yeah.
That is the lamest thing there is, and they do it with the Beatles too. Okay, so the Beach Boys are not alone with this capital problem. They think that they gotta finish an album because it's gonna go on the charts. It's
Yeah.
not gonna go on the charts. Fuck
Yeah.
the charts. No one cares about the radio. Nobody cares about the charts. We care about the fact that the Smile box set came out and it won a fucking Grammy because people want to hear the music. They don't give a shit about popular radio charts and whether if it's going to get on the big radio station in town. Capitol don't do that anymore ever again. That's a stupid mistake.
That's such a good point. Such a good
I mean,
point.
that's just a mentality left over from the 70s and the 60s, maybe even.
And of course, for the 2011 box set, they isolated the vocals from the demo of Barnyard and I'm in Great Shape, and then just put them on top of the backing tracks.
I think that's cacophonous on the way they did it. The way Alan and I did it before the Smile Project was actually signed up, is a lot more like congenial. They're not trying to make it into a finished thing.
Yeah.
It doesn't have to be finished. If it is not, then we hear the rougher version of it. It's not bad.
Yeah. Going back to Barnyard for a second, so the it only survives on a acetate, and that was happens to be one of the acetates that Mark Lynette found, because Mark Lynette told me that I asked him how many acetates were in the vault and when he first plowed through them in '88, and he said almost nothing. I was like, "What?" So
Yeah,
that's
but then the Dury Parks has those other acetates.
yeah, yeah. So that would mean that out of
We don't
everything,
have access to those yet.
no, yeah. So that would mean if almost everything was gone and one of the only things that remained was Barnyard, that I mean, the stars were aligning. How lucky is that? How lucky is that? That's all because that's the only way how it survives. Like,
Yeah, yeah, but again, we don't know what Dury Parks has yet.
yeah, that's true.
Okay, I'm not really ready for, I mean, this to be over until that problem is taken care of. Melinda did not want to fork over for them, and they were let go, and that was a huge mistake.
And for the audience members who are listening, the Dury Parks estates was Dury Parks was Van Dyke Parks's wife, and she had a bunch of Smile acetates, which had a bunch of rough mixes and stuff on there, and it was sold to a private collector who does not share it with anyone.
Right, and it was offered to Melinda Wilson at a price, and Melinda did not have the vision to pick that up.
Yeah, so Mark Lynette kind of contradicted himself. First, he told me, he said, when I heard those, when I went over to the guy's house and listened, he said there's stuff that I had never heard before. And then he
Right, right, and stop right there. Accentuate the positive. What he said right there is the truth.
yeah,
I'm not going to take the inertia version.
and then a few seconds later, he paused and he was like, "Well, it was nothing extremely
No, I don't
monumental."
believe the nothing. I believe the
Yeah,
exposure.
yeah. So same thing with I'm in Great Shape. They took the demo vocals for Barnyard and put them on top of the back of the acetate for Barnyard. So if you don't think the vocal should be isolated and put on top of that to complete it, do you think that Barnyard should just be therefore just be an instrumental?
No, 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 no. Like I mentioned earlier, Ellen and I
Oh
took
yeah, yeah. Oh,
spliced demo, spliced the most important parts of the vocal demo uh, before the tracks,
I see.
and then you heard the lyrics first, and then the track, and
I
then the
guess.
lyrics first, and then the track for those two pieces. It's what you're doing is you're breaking apart the song, as it would have sounded if it were finished, but you're actually hearing what the track sounds like, and you're actually hearing the words
Bumping
without
things.
them trying to because I don't think the words and the demos they don't mix together too well the way Mark did it. In my opinion, it sounds better when you can actually hear Brian playing it on a piano and then hear what the track is. Trying to finish it is a mistake.
It's passable. It's passable, but I agree with
Yeah, but you know what? It's not real. It's not. It's not.
you.
It's not real.
I know. I agree with what you're saying. Things need to be bumped.
It's AI before AI.
I get what you're saying. Things need to be bumped against each other rather than trying to.
Yeah, because you know what? If that's unfinished, then let's hear it as it is,
Rather,
not like artificially, put together.
rather than make a Frankenstein. So yeah, so much stuff happened in that was recorded in October 1966. So November 4th, 1966, the first movement for Surf's Up is recorded. Beautiful, awesome, loving it. So, and then on the 14th of November, The Old Master Painter slash You Are My Sunshine was recorded. Um, and that was finished. That was finished. Yeah, it was finished, right?
Right.
Yeah,
You're My Sunshine. Dennis sings it.
yeah, did it? Yeah, yeah.
You know what? When we first got that, we only had an instrumental version of it, and then we finally found the one with Dennis on it. We were just like, oh my God, that was so beautiful.
Was it on a reel or on acetate?
I don't remember. Not an acetate. I think it was a tape.
So yeah, that's the thing. It only exists on that tape. It where the original elements went, we don't
We
know.
have it, thank goodness.
But like I said, the stars are aligning with this with the story of Smile. Like, I mean, could you imagine if You're My Sunshine or Barnyard had gone missing? I mean, I the thought is unbearable. You know what I mean? The thought is
Yeah.
unbearable. Okay, so okay, woo.
Well,
Okay,
we need a Dennis vocal on that smile. We do.
whew. So big one on November 28th, 1966. The infamous fire tape happens.
Yeah.
Infamous fire tape happens, and this is I have a question or two about because what was released in 2011 and what was done on the 2004 concert is they added the woodpecker vocals from Smiley Smile. The da, 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 da. That wasn't on the original Fire mix.
Not needed.
I know, but like there's okay, so this is one of the other things that's on the bootlegs that I feel needs to be officially released. The original Fire mix that Brian made. That's on the bootlegs and that's in the 1985 documentary. Remember? Am I on the right track? That's
Yeah.
the original Fire mix.
Yeah. No,
Or
because there is the one, like it has the intro with the fire engines, and then that was actually a separate piece, but it was like she gives speeches, you or he gives speeches, you put that up against the other thing, and then fire. There is a version that is the best version.
is that the
We
version I'm
use
talking
that.
about? That's on the
I'm
bootleg.
not sure. I'm not sure
I asked
which release it's on. I can't. I'm not good at that anymore.
it's the one with the crackling sound effects, remember?
Yeah.
The crackling sound effects removed from the 2004 concert and 2011 box set. That's gone. It's like so people like listen to the 2011 box set, whether on YouTube or Apple Music or Amazon, and they think, oh yeah, Mrs. O'Leary's cow, fire. It's like, no, that's not
I'm going to say this. Brian Wilson Presents Smile, did all these elaborations.
yeah,
And you know what? They sound really good as a Brian Wilson solo album. They
yeah,
sounded great in concert. I love the way they sound. I don't have a problem with it. But when it comes to the Smile original tapes,
totally different ball game.
right.
Yeah. Even Darian himself said in the Beautiful Dreamer documentary, he said, quote, "Hey Brian, we're not trying to finish a 1967 album here. We're just how do we perform this music in a way that it would flow for a live concert?"
Yeah.
And
And that's the most important thing to remember about Brian Wilson Presents Smile.
yeah,
I think there is, it's basically, look, Melinda Wilson would have had the Wonderments recording on the old Smile tapes if it was up to her. When I was first brought into Capitol Records, before Mark Lynette was involved with, the meetings, okay, Mark Lynette was not invited to this meeting because he was a little too close to Melinda and Melinda's POV, right?
mhm.
Now, Alan Boyd and I had already made that mix a year before this meeting. We didn't tell anybody at Capitol about that. We just kind of knew it was coming. So we kind of were getting ready and preparing, and Alan was really not ready for it yet. And I helped him. Okay. Then I got a phone call first. And then Alan Boyd got a phone call second. We both arrived at the meeting. I wasn't even sure Alan was going to be there, but he was. Okay. And we attended the meeting, and the meeting was about how do we make it so that Melinda Wilson does not ask us or force us to put the Wondermints on the old tapes. And Mark was left out of that meeting because, he was too close to Melinda at that time. And I came up with a strategy to avoid the Wondermints being on the original tapes.
You're
And I don't even remember what it was, but it was a nefarious little trick. I mean, do this, do that, and then it'll all fall together. And it did.
so you're saying that there could have been a
And it was this brilliant thing that I did that I forgot. So I don't know, but we had to kind of circumvent Melinda's, overwhelming,
that is unfathomable. That is
control over that.
that is unfathomable. So you're saying that there could have been a scenario where the Wondermints and would have sung on the original tracks for shit.
I was brought into Capitol before Mark Lynette for the reason of circumventing Melinda's hope to do that. I know that Mark, probably would agree with me. That wasn't the best idea, but he was working for Melinda.
Yeah. Wow. I can't. The thought is even unfathomable that you'd hear new vocal. I mean,
I
any.
know. Oh, but believe me, the public would have thought that was lame ass shit, and they would have not got their Grammy.
Yeah. Yeah. Exactly. So that original Fire mix, is that an original Fire mix that's in the 85 doc that's on the bootlegs with the crackling
Yeah,
Brian mix? Or is it something, or is it like something that could have been mixed in the 70s? Is that an original Brian mix?
I believe it's an original Brian mix
Yeah.
because Dennis Wilson in 1977, there's a tape where he says, "I found the Fire tapes." Nothing changed on that crackling shit. And,
Yeah.
from the time Dennis announced it to, all the times that I'd heard it, up until like the remixes later.
And yeah, that totally makes sense because I
There's an original Fire.
yeah,
That, you're all right. And that should be on.
it's on the bootlegs. It sounds crystal clear. It's in the 85 doc. It needs to be released. It
It's
has not,
not,
huh?
it's not released.
No,
Okay.
it needs to be. It needs
Yeah.
to.
Well, you see, the thing is about the difference between me and you here is what the releases of all this stuff are. I just remember them from the tapes.
But they released just the crackling sounds just as is.
I know.
Like vocals only, crackling only. They didn't release the original Brian's original Fire tape mix.
Okay, so you know what? Further proof that there's room for another release.
Yeah. So it's crazy. And it sounds better than what they revamped and released on the 2011 with the woodpecker da 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 da. And they removed the crackling sound, as I said, and it just sounds more like Fire. It's no funky stuff going on. It's just pure terror. That's what it was meant to be. So the very next day, I Want to Be Around and Workshop were recorded. And Brian edited them together back to back, and that was finished.
Well, yeah, there you go. And that's the beginning of the Water Suite,
Yeah.
too. I mean, the
Yes.
Water Suite begins with I Want to Be Around and Workshop. And Carol Kay said it's rebuilding after the fire. That's what Brian said.
And they were recorded the day after the Fire session, so it makes
Yeah,
sense.
yeah.
So so it makes sense. And well, interestingly, they had different names on that day. Originally, I Want to Be Around was named Friday Night. Is that right? Friday Night, and then
Yeah,
Workshop was originally named I'm in Great Shape for some reason, but then but
yeah, like I told you earlier, there was some
yeah. They,
controversy about titles on tape boxes that were, not accurate.
it
But
says,
which leads to confusion ultimately.
yeah, so when it says on the back of the album cover, I'm in great shape, some people might go, why would they put I'm in great shape there if I'm in great shape is only 28 seconds? Well, it's like, well, that would be I want to be around / workshop. That, you know what I mean? You see what I mean? Which would be
There, but okay,
that would make
yeah, okay. Look, that's one of the okay, that piece, what you're talking about right there, was one of the great confusions of, Brian Wilson Presents Smile. I got a feeling that what's going on with that is Darian pretty much remembered all of the stuff that we, concocted back in the 80s. But that was new information that he wasn't hip to. Okay. He wasn't aware, and they went with old information on that one.
Yeah.
Okay, so and then so they did it in the concert that way, and one thing led to another. Now, just between you and me and everybody listening to this right now, when we did the Smile box set for Capitol, the Beach Boys Smile sessions, I had Darian come down to Alan Boyd's house, right, where Alan Boyd lives, and you know, and we were kind of going over things, and Darian explained that they'd made an error with I'm in Great Shape and Barnyard.
Yeah.
Barnyard belongs, and I'm in Great Shape belongs
Back to back.
with Heroes and Villains. And the other thing, and so we got Mark Lynette to redo that and put that there where it belonged, so that Barnyard and the actual I'm in Great Shape, not the fake I'm in Great Shape, were with Heroes and Villains where they belonged. Unfortunately, Mark refused to re-edit the I Want to Be Around and Workshop and put it back after Fire. So because he had made this really complicated edit to replicate what had done on Brian Wilson Presents Smile, and he just didn't want to redo it. So, there's that, and now because of that, we don't have a complete water suite at all on Smile as it is today.
Yeah. So
That's just the truth.
yeah.
And it took me bringing Darian down to Allen's just to get the Barnyard and I'm in Great Shape in the correct place, but we couldn't get Cool Water in the correct place. We could get the water suite in the correct place, and that's just too bad. But again, that leaves it open for a more raw version of Smile, which is what we really need.
So for those listening, it may be a little bit confusing, but I'm in Great Shape was supposed it was, as we've said, was supposed to be follow Heroes and Villains and go before Barnyard, but on the 2004 Brian Wilson Presents Smile concert version, it was moved all the way down to side two. So,
That
and
was a mistake.
yeah, it was a mistake, and they fixed that in the 2011 box set. They moved it back up where it was supposed to be, but I Want to Be Around slash Workshop, that was moved up from the bottom of the album. That's what what Dom is describing as it's supposed to go after Fire, not moved up to earlier in the
Which
album.
is somewhat predicated by the fact that Brian cut that the day after he cut Fire.
Yeah, exactly. So some things got in the wrong order for the 2004 concert version. Some things were fixed, others are still in the wrong place. I hope I summarized that well for those,
Yeah, that's fine.
because it can be confusing. So December comes around, December 15th, 1966. The Surf's Up piano demo is done. Piano demo.
What date again?
December 15th, 1966.
That's the day that CBS cameras were there.
Yeah, I like
Brian recorded it by himself. Yeah. Which
Jules.
was described in Jules Siegel's article in Cheetah.
Yeah,
Jules Siegel was there that day. David Oppenheim and the CBS cameras were there that
yep.
day.
I
We
want to.
have the tape of Brian playing Surf's Up. We don't have vocals from the Beach Boys that day because Jules Siegel says in his article that there was an argument and the Beach Boys left this Surf's Up vocal session. And that what that adds up to is Mike Love, being pissy about the lyrics to Surf's Up, which is idiocy.
And then everyone goes home, and then Brian sits down and records this beautiful piano demo of Surf's Up, which was eventually released on here and in the 2011 box set. I mean, that piano demo, my God, it takes you away from this world. It's like, how can something so simple be so captivatingly ethereally and hauntingly beautiful. I mean, that's Brian Wilson right there.
I mean, isn't it the first thing that Brian and Van Dyke wrote?
There's for you see, that's the thing. It depends on which year you ask them. First, they said that
Ah,
Van Dyke said in the 70s, Surf's Up was the first album we wrote. And then later for the Beautiful Dreamer documentary, they said that Heroes and Villains was the first song that they wrote.
Afangul
But,
knows then.
so for 1966, all that was done for, and again, this is assuming with the original intent that the album would have been released in Christmas. The only thing they had was the first movement and the piano demo. Now, people have done, and Mark Lynette did it for the 2011 box set. They just put Brian's vocals from the demo. They just replaced Carl's vocals from the 71 completed Surf's Up, and they replace it. What do you think about that? Because first off,
Personal feeling about this, Surf's Up um, was finished by the Beach Boys with Van Dyke Parks in 1971.
that's it. So that's it.
And it's close enough to the actual Smile era. And then, in other words, Brian could still sing really, really well.
Yeah,
And to me, that's the version of Surf's Up.
I agree.
Okay. That's what was, I would guess, meant to be. I mean, look at Cabanescence on 2020. There was work done there too, right? And there may have been some work done on Our Prayer as well, right? So like, um,
Well, they released the yeah. So go ahead.
right, so this might be controversial because what I am saying is that it a tape from not 1966, not 1967 should be, on the 19, but dig this. This is why I say this. Because what they did in 1971 was an attempt to replicate what they would have done in 1966. And it's not 40 years later.
Yeah,
It's
it's
5 years later. And it's because there is a demand from underground disc jockeys and everybody saying, "Where is Surf's Up? Where is Surf's Up? God damn, where is Surf's Up?" And they go ahead and they take all these 1966 tapes and make a final vocal ending. And most importantly, the children's song and the message that they play, the song in love and the children know the way, is there. It is not on Brian's demos.
yeah. So
So I,
yeah,
I make a concession for this original version of Surf's Up being the one that they finished in 1971. That is the group version. I am sure that was what Brian's intent was because at that point in time, the Beach Boys would also do anything to make Brian feel comfortable because they wanted his involvement in the group. As you remember, he just returned to the group really more full in Sunflower.
yeah,
And he wasn't really involved much with 2020. And, they wanted him to be with the band.
yeah,
So I'm sure they were doing everything they could to please Brian on the finishing of Surf's Up. Van Dyke Parks was there. So this is an actual Smile session, as far as I'm concerned, post haste,
yeah.
which is different than what, Darian and Mark and everybody else did 40 years later.
I like uh you mentioned Jules Siegel being there when the CBS cameras were filming Brian playing Surf's Up. He said, quote, this is Jules Siegel said, quote, I was there when he did Surf's Up for the CBS cameras. I was in the car with him. We smoked a joint before he went and did that. And afterwards I said to him, quote, why don't you just stop fucking around with this stuff and release that as a single now? Like right now. Don't wait for the album to do it. But he was afraid to do it.
I think that the 1966 recording of Surf's Up on December 15th could have been a single as was, and it could have been on Smile as was.
Just the
It,
dem
it's it's
just
it's
the
that good.
just the demo could have been on Smiley Smile, you know what I mean? It could have.
Well, yeah, I mean, it could have been released, but I don't think that was really kind of what Brian would have wanted for Surf's Up. And I think its eventual release in 1971 was the Magna Carta,
Yeah.
because I got a feeling that the Beach Boys could have really faded from existence in the 70s if it wasn't for that.
Yeah.
And that's why I don't like the Disney documentary, and Mike Love is allowed, to say it wasn't right for the group when it was the thing that revived the group. It was Surf's Up revived the group. They
There's,
might have fallen into ether if
yeah.
they did not release Surf's Up, the album, and the song when they did. Because Sunflower, the best possible effort the group could have done, tanked. Where are they going to go after that but to release Surf's Up and get their ass back in gear?
Yeah.
So, the Beach Boys story, as told in the Disney documentary, is wrong. I think they should actually bring it back and re edit it and put it out again because it sucks because of that.
Yeah. So nowadays, people just listen to the Surf's Up mix that's on the 2011 box set with Brian's demo vocals flown in on the finished track from 1971. In fact, Mark Lynette told me, and it was like, wow, that's so true. That couldn't have been done for the album in 1967 because they were recorded on separate tape boxes. You know what I mean? They were recorded on different tape boxes because, I mean, nowadays, easiest thing in the world. Oh, let me take this clip and merge it with this clip. It's like, no, it's like you couldn't do that back then. I was like, duh, because my degree is in video technology, not I wasn't trained on analog. So I was
Yeah.
so it's like if you were going to release Surf's Up in 1967, the only thing possible to do would be to play the first movement and then the piano demo. It's like because that's all that existed. It wasn't finished until, like you said, in 1971.
And the mix that we have of the opening part is with those like loud horns on it and stuff,
Yeah.
which I mean, they reduced those properly for the 1971 version. I think that the mix of the backing track with the horns being too loud, that was corrected on the 1971 version. So that's another reason why it's better.
Yeah. So
That to me, again, 1971 is the finished Surf's Up.
exactly.
And it's done the way Brian would have done it for Smile. I mean, and I don't think that's, something that I mean, it was successful. It helped the group to become successful again.
Absolutely. Okay.
God bless that version.
No.
It's way overlooked now in
I
all the
know.
Smile talk. I don't agree with that. I believe that the 1971 version, culled from 1966 tapes with a finish, the
Yeah.
same way they finished Cabin Essence in 69, I mean, that's how it is.
Now, Michael Vossi famously said in his article that Surf's Up was supposed to close the album. And that's of course why you had it at the end of your original sequence, right?
Well, that was the theory for a long time. I got a feeling that theory came around. I don't know why Michael Vossi said that, but I feel that because the Beatles' Sergeant Pepper album ended with A Day in the Life, naturally people would think, oh, well, Surf's Up is the big song, so that's going to end Smile. But I mean, that may have just been an assumption. I don't know. But I believe that what Brian Wilson told Darian when they were working on it, closer to the truth.
So you said so there was a moment where Brian said actually Surf's Up goes in the middle. Could you describe on that for a second?
Well, yeah, Darian talks about it where, they were working on it and he was showing him the sequence. And then, he showed him Childless Father of the Man. And then it moved to something else and go, no, 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 Surf's Up goes there. And it was one of those moments, according to Darian, uh, and I can understand this as he describes it, that, Brian returned to old Brian. He wasn't flaky Brian. He was like determined Brian.
Wow.
So I'm going to give Brian that.
How'd you
It's not Brian. It's not Brian acting like weird. It's Brian acting like decisive. Comes from Brian himself in a lucid moment. So
but but for
okay,
some
so
reason
that's I'm gonna give that one for sure. Yeah, It all makes sense
Yeah.
now, you know.
So Surf's Up was supposed to close side one, is that correct?
I guess so.
So for many years people thought that Surf's Up was at the end, what that means what ends the album? Good Vibrations?
Yeah.
They just
I mean, that there are things about Brian Wilson Presents Smile that, are, helpful, like things that, became, I don't discount like that just because it's new. I pay attention to what seems to be correct and what seems to be not correct. I found places where it was incorrect and found places where it was, you know, better than what we had, better information than what we had before. I mean, what happens in that case is you have research that's leading you to a certain area, but you may not have all of the information. And then you get a new piece of information and you know it because it makes sense with the sequence of things. And that's the best way I could put it, I mean,
so in 1967 Surf's Up was not finished, is that correct?
right.
Now that's interesting because I remember exactly where I was. I was reading your book in between my shifts, what, a couple years, 4 years ago or something. And on page 94, I read this and I shot up from my chair at work. And I was like, what? You know what I'm talking about? Or no? You wrote in your book, quote, Brian held two final tracking sessions for the middle section of Surf's Up, both of which exist and remain unreleased to this day. And then you said a finished tape of Surf's Up from early 1967 does exist, although it has never been released in any form. What does that come? I mean, obviously that's not true, but how did that get in your book?
Where is that?
In your book on page 94.
Let me see that. Oh my God.
Page 94. I swear to God, I remember I was sitting down and I read that and I shot up from my chair and I was thinking, what? Huh?
Okay. A finished tape of Surf's Up from early 1967 does exist. I'm wondering how I could possibly said that.
I know because I I quickly realized how it couldn't have been true. Now for the middle section, there's of course dispute. No one can see
Oh God, I don't know. I don't know how this got there because
really.
I think what I'm talking about here
Uh-huh.
is what you're talking about, like the one that was cut in December.
Yeah,
I don't think
because
that what I'm saying means that the track and the Brian on the piano were ever edited together or anything like that. What I mean is, like for example, if you I said this earlier, if you wanted to finish Smile with only stuff from 1966 and 1967, it can be done because I would consider like a finished, the demo, um, or and it's not really a demo, but the one they cut on the 15th of December, right? That beautiful thing.
in the
I
demo.
would consider that a finished version.
Oh yeah, yeah.
At the time, that's what I meant.
Gotcha.
Wrote this because there were backing tracks, but there's also, you know what? It's what's screwed up about here is I didn't put a transitional sentence there.
So yeah,
And that confuses you and anybody else who's an expert. And I
yeah,
kind of fucked up in my writing because I needed to sort of explain that.
because this
Remember, I wrote this book in 2 months.
really in
In
2005.
2 or 3 months, bam, and it was done.
Because this came out in 2005 and it says so but the demo was released on the 1993, so it had been released, so I
You know what? And another thing that could have happened there is I may have forgot that it was on the 93 box set.
yeah.
Sorry. I'm human. I
No,
fuck.
it's okay. That just goes to show. So man, I've been wanting to ask you that for like 4 years.
All right.
So one small mystery is it apparently, sadly, no one can seem to remember that if a January 23rd, 1967 session for Surf's Up was actually recorded or not. Because on paper it says it happened, but it's never turned up.
Right.
No one can remember if it took place. Now, I did read in Keith Badman's book, quote, even though a satisfactory tracking and vocals master for the first movement of Surf's Up was completed last month, Brian takes charge this afternoon of a further instrumental tracking session for the song, overdubbing additional strings and horns onto the tape from December 15th, 1966. Then later, in the company of a 16-piece string and horn section, Brian returns his attentions to the first movement of the song with additional recordings. So is it that he just overdubbed onto the first movement that day?
That's what it sounds like.
So it's not like
Hey, so here's the thing. That's why the 1971 is so important because I think whatever they meant to be on it is on it. That
I, okay. Isn't there a
where those came from, who knows?
isn't there an empty tape box somewhere or no?
I don't know.
I heard that somewhere. That's
Yeah, I don't know.
okay. So it's not like there's a whole middle section that was recorded in January that's missing. It's that Brian just overdubbed onto the first movement from
I
from
think so
okay. That seems to make sense.
because those horns they go, you know that
Yeah. So that was recorded. Okay, so that's what was recorded on January 23rd. And okay.
because remember the original tape that has him doing a session. It's just chin, 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 and they're shaking the percussion. That doesn't have all those horns on it. So there you go.
Okay, I think we've covered all of Surf's Up. Okay, so literally, so then the next day after the Surf's Up piano demo, we have You're Welcome was recorded. So,
Simple enough.
yeah. So on your sequence, you had um, You're Welcome be the final song on the Smile album. Do you still adhere to that or no?
Yeah, I do. I think You're Welcome was meant to. I heard someplace that it was the ending or something. So
From where? From what? From where'd you hear that from?
because look, they invited you into this listening experience. It's one of those things.
It makes sense.
It's
They
pretty simple.
they sang that on the 2004 tour. You're welcome in a few places, and I'm like, so close yet so far. Okay, so and then in 3 days later, on December 19th, 1966, heroes it said according to my notes, Heroes and Villains new instrumental track now missing. Um, I don't know really what to make about that, but essentially, as not
Not going over every heroes and villains session, are we?
no no we're
Okay,
not.
because let me just say this about heroes and villains. Heroes and Villains Part 1 and Part 2, they're really clear. They're on the 45. Brian finished one day after they made the lawsuit, he finished the final mix of Part 1. And then that's when Smile goes into comatose state.
Yeah,
Waits about a month, and then he goes back in the studio with Van Dyke, and they cut vegetables. Paul McCartney shows up. You know, I mean, and then he goes in and he cuts, you know, um, the water stuff, and then that's the end.
yeah,
Pretty cut and dried shit. The only thing that's not like that is the fact that Brian got inertia and he started to recut a new version of Heroes and Villains, completely brand new session from scratch.
even when he
And it
hit,
was a
yeah,
complete waste of time,
yeah,
which shows that Brian started to doubt himself.
yeah.
And to me, that tape of Heroes and Villains cut, I'm not sure what month, February, March, I don't know when it was cut, but he goes ahead and he does it again, and it's not
I know.
necessary.
So just for the audience, vocals for the Smile session started on 10/6/66 and ended on for 66 ended on December 28th, 1966. Now, okay, so as 1966 comes, it misses its Christmas deadline. December 28th, 1966 concluded the final Smile session for the year 1966. And incredibly, this is all that was recorded for Heroes and Villains at that time. As I said, the verse, Barnyard, and some vocals. So as of December 29th, 1966, the final Smile session for the year 1966. At this time, one song was released, Good Vibrations. 13 songs were finished. One song was 90% finished. Two songs were unfinished. One song was missing vocals. One song was only a demo, and two songs hadn't even started yet. So, had Smile somehow managed to be released in December 1966 with only the material they had, the album would have been, by my calculations, roughly only 30 minutes long. Now, they've done 13 albums that were less than 30 minutes long. So, yes, in theory, an album could have been released in 1967. However, as I mentioned, things were still unfinished. And yeah,
Yeah. Well, one of the reasons why I never put Bob Dylan albums on a cassette tape back in the day was because they were longer than the 45 minutes that was on a, cassette side. So
yeah.
technically, an album could be up to about 45 minutes long.
So, yeah, why in the world did it take Brian 5 months into the project to really start on Heroes and Villains? Again, the main song. Why? Why?
Well, it's going to be his next single. And he might have been hiding it as well. Probably didn't want people to hear it.
Yeah,
Probably waited till the end and then cut it. It was hot, get it out. Like John Lennon with Instant Karma, which was 2 or 3 days and it was out.
yeah. So all of January and February and the first of March, the first
First, second, third of March around
yeah,
then.
of March
Turned it in.
is all dedicated to heroes and villains.
Yeah.
Why does everyone always emphasize and in awe, AWE awe over the 19 good vibration sessions, but we don't hear as much talk at all about the 31 plus heroes and villains sessions? Why is that?
Well, because we were used to it by then.
Yeah, that's true. Exactly. So, like I said, we're not going to go over each one, but Heroes and Villains Part 1 was finished. Mark Lynette found it in the vaults, and you were there, right? You were there.
Yeah,
Uh,
88. I
yeah,
went to a session, a Rio Grande session with Lenny Warnaker was there. They were doing a mix down to Rio Grande, and I was, brought to the session, and I was put in another studio room, and Mark Lynette played it for me, while Lenny was working with Brian, for a little bit there, and I listened to it on the headphones, and I couldn't believe the first time I heard, uh, I still got the jive to survive with the heroes and villains. He's talking about all the bullshit that he was dealing with, right? And I was like, wow. In the Smile era, he's already talking about the crap he's facing and how he's going to kick that's ass.
yeah,
I was really like, wow, Brian really like was so on top of the game and he knew what he was dealing with. Unfortunately, he did eventually crack.
yeah. So and there's even an article in your book where he's talking on the phone with a reporter, and he says, "Yeah, I'm doing the final mix on it tonight," and he finishes it like that night. It's finished, and but just totally down the tank, down the memory hole until Mark Lynette plows through the vaults, and it was released 2 years later on the Smiley Smile Wild
Right,
Honey
right.
UFO.
And yeah,
And
and then of course, as I mentioned earlier, part two.
it was released here.
Right. Well, that's part one. And then part two
Yeah.
of Heroes and Villains that's on the single. Mark Lynette showed me at his house a tape with I think three parts of it that were unedited. They were not edited together. And I
Okay.
listened to it with him and we looked at the whole thing and it was the original tape from the 60s. And, I said, well, Mark, those spaces are just, you know, and that's what he did. And then that's what's on side two of the 45 in the Smile box set. We got that 45 RPM record included. I said, look, this is the follow up to Good Vibrations, ladies and gentlemen, you know, and in capital. And when I showed them my 45 sleeve for Heroes and Villains that said printed in USA, it was a Capitol Records sleeve. It wasn't the the Smiley Smile version of Heroes and Villains was released in a cartoon sleeve, right? Whereas the other one had the Guy Webster pictures. So I showed them I have two copies of the original sleeve because guess what happened? That original sleeve was pressed in the United States. It was going to be on the Heroes and Villains Part 1 and Part 2 single. It said Heroes and Villains on both sides. No other song titles. That means it was a two-part single. No, people have doubted me for years on that. But if it was, so bottom line, they saw my suite. These things were pressed in America, these 45 sleeves. But when, like, finally they redid Heroes and Villains for Smiley Smile and they came up with a new 45 sleeve, they sent the original Smile 45 sleeves for Heroes and Villains to Sweden. Now, I got a lot of friends in Sweden. I said, can you find me a Good Vibrations 45 sleeve? And I got a couple of them in the mail. And I handed it over to Capitol Records here in the States. And then they, they made the perfect, copy of them. And then anybody who's got the Smile box set gets the 45. And then plus we decided, well, since we're going to do that, why not do vegetables? And they put Surf's Up on the B side.
My mind is so blown. I already knew that, but just hearing you say it, I've reading your book. That's a
It was a compromise they made to me because other things that were supposed to be involved with the box set did not happen because they were concerned about Smile never being finished ever. So I said, well, at least what you could do is release Brian's follow up to Good Vibrations.
just yeah. I just
In
realized.
its original picture sleeve.
I
They
just
were the thing that really won them over was showing them the Swedish sleeve that was really the American sleeve early.
I just kind of realized. Realized this, that if someone goes and buys a copy of that Sweden did sleeve, you're essentially holding Smile. You are.
You're holding a piece of real Smile memorabilia. If
Yes.
you have the original Heroes and Villains sleeve from
Oh.
Sweden, I have two of them, so I'm not like gonna hoard anymore. You guys can have.
Could you find on? I'm gonna have to hunt that down.
Yep, you're gonna have to hunt that down.
It's talking about the tracks are almost all done. The album cover, of course, is complete, and the back cover. Of
Right.
The sleeves are completed. Now, very interestingly, in Look, Listen, Vibrate, Smile, Brad Elliott says that there were 400,000 album covers printed and booklets printed. The booklet was also complete as well, in addition to this and the
And a
sleeve.
few booklets survived,
But
thankfully.
okay, so 400,000 actual Smile in 1967 album covers printed. Did any of them survive? Because that would be worth a fortune. That's actually Smile.
Okay, so Peter Riem, who was the best Beach Boys collector ever. He had the best Beach Boys collection of all time. What Peter Riem had came from Capitol Records, okay? Peter went to Capitol Records in like 1975 or 1976, and they were going to throw away the master mock-up of the Smile album cover. I saw it. It was at his house. He took a bunch of what in Hollywood, we call industrial waste. Okay. Peter Riem had the front and back cover, industrial waste of Smile in his house. Okay. And, okay, this really pertains to the box set because a piece of that ended up in the box set. I went to Peter's house and I said, Peter, what we need to do is make a photostat copy of the back cover because all of the bootleg copies of the sleeve were very, very, very dark and grainy, and you couldn't see 3D picture. When I went to Peter's, I go, oh my God, that's an actual photograph, you
Yeah.
know, on the back cover of the Beach Boys without Brian, right? With Bruce. And they're wearing those polka dot shirts that they wore on the tour that year, right? Okay. So I took that down from Peter's wall, and Peter didn't know what photostat copy was, right? But I found a place in Greeley, Colorado, and I took it, and they did a 131 line screen shot of that, right? Which I still have. Now, something happened with Brad Elliott ripping off, Peter Riem, and who knows where that is now? I don't know. Really don't know. It's really a sad, tragic tale. Okay. The front and back cover mock ups that were at Capitol. Peter had them. I don't know where they are now. So that photostat copy, the people at Capitol Records were going to release that bad bootleg quality back cover picture. And I said, no, look what I have. I came in the next day with the thing I had photostated from Peter Riem. And what you see on the back of your Smile box set is from my photostat that I took from Peter's house. So, yeah, yeah, Peter had the industrial waste, not only of the Smile front and back, but a lot of very interesting, Beach Boys items that were at Capitol Records.
So did any of the 400,000 ones that were actually printed, did any of them survive?
The only thing I've ever seen were what happened was they made a bootleg pressing of those sleeves in the 70s from Peter's what Peter got out of Capitol. They ended up pressing those,
Yeah.
and those are around, but I do not think anybody has an original of those what you're talking about.
Because like with the sleeve, like with the Heroes and Villains sleeves, that would be an actual piece of Smile.
Right, but the single, yes, but not the actual covers. I don't think those exist. Some booklets, I think if I remember correctly, 3 or 4 booklets survived, maybe 5.
Out of how many were,
I don't know. You have the numbers, right?
yeah, 419,200 copies accompanying LP size 12-page booklets were printed.
Yeah.
Only like what? You said four survived? Four? I like how Michael Vossi said about the album cover, quote, everybody who knew anything about graphics and about art thought that the cover was not terribly well done, but Brian knew better. He was right. It was exactly what he wanted, precisely what he wanted.
Well, it is coming from simplicity,
Yeah,
and it is coming from animation. It's not like, classic rock bullshit.
yeah. It, as he said, quote, it's exactly what he wanted. Now, the back cover we already talked, but the track listing kind of confuses people. Some, at first glance, someone might be like, "Oh, that's the sequence right there," but no, because
No, no, no,
because as people can clearly see, it says "C label for correct playing order."
because we didn't have the correct playing order.
Yes, because
They had to go to press without it, and that
yeah,
happens all the time in the business.
so they're like, "Where's the record? Where's the record?" Someone writes in random order the track list on that sheet of paper, you know what I mean? And then they use it for this.
Yeah, for a long time we thought that was Brian's handwritten note.
Whose handwriting is that?
We don't know. It
Carl
may be Brian's, and it may be somebody else who wrote it down for Brian.
was I heard
We don't know. I don't know.
it had been Carl's maybe, or I don't know.
It might have been, somebody working with him.
Yeah.
Could have been
So,
Michael Fosse. I don't know. We don't know. That's a detail. But originally, we did find that, like Peter Riem found that in Capitol's, industrial waste.
mhm.
So it's the real thing. You know what I'm going to do? I'm going to get my sleeves are framed. I'm going to
Oh my gosh.
I'm
Okay.
going to I'm going to take them down. I'm going to show them to you on camera. So I have a nice little display in my house of the 45, the original 45 sleeves that are related to Smile.
All
And
right.
one of them was really Smiley Smile, but let's just go with this, okay? Now, we all know the original 45 sleeve to Good Vibrations. I love the lighting in the background. My girlfriend and I call that Sunset Strip lighting. And it really does reflect that kind of a Sunset Strip vibe.
Yeah.
This was 1966, and the Sunset Strip was at its peak. So those kind of lightings, it says it all. And the Beach Boys, as far as their fashion goes, they look pretty cool. And
Hmm.
it's I think it's one of the greatest 45 sleeves I've ever seen, and it has to because the music is so good. It matches the music really well. Um, and then the follow up was going to be Heroes and Villains. And here is the original Capitol Records sleeve. Okay. And if you look really closely in the corner, it says printed in USA. It says Capitol Records, it says a number, and it says printed in USA. This is not a fake. This is an original Smile sleeve. It's in a frame,
Wow.
and it's got the Guy Webster pictures of Brian in the pool. Another picture from that is in the cover of my book. And these pictures here were used in the teen set. So, and there's the other side of that. Notice they both say on both sides, it says heroes and villains on
Yeah.
both sides. And again, these are original American Capitol 45 sleeves of heroes and villains. And when the Smiley Smile version of Heroes and Villains came out on Brother Records later that year,
Hmm.
and in other words, they ditched this sleeve at Capitol because Brother and Capitol were now combined. So, it these Capitol sleeves were sent to Sweden.
The sweet
Sweden.
all.
And then America released this as the Heroes. So these actually had the Smiley Smile 45 uh,
Yeah.
a version of Heroes and Villains
Yeah.
in it in Sweden with an American Capital Press sleeve because they were just shipped to Sweden. And in the United States, we got this version of the Heroes and Villains sleeve.
It's Venus and Mars. I mean, look at the.
Yeah, I mean,
I mean, it's.
see that. I mean, and I think Van Dyke Parks is the one who said when he first heard Heroes and Villains on the radio, he go, "Oh man, that is not what we were doing." He was very, very, very disappointed in the American version, in the sleeve here of the Heroes and Villains Smiley Smile version, I should say, as opposed to what they cut for Smile. For anybody who's confusing that still, please don't.
Yeah.
Cantina version is the one.
He says on the phone in the article, he says, I'm finishing the mix tonight. And it is buried, hidden away. Mark Lynette finds it. It's released in 1993 on the twofer, released here, and released on the 2011 box set. That's what it would have been in, folks. If somehow if someone gets this, you are holding an actual piece of Smile. I mean,
There
wow.
they are.
So, Heroes and Villains Part One was finished. Why did they? Okay, yes, it's I guess it's semi understandable why they butchered it and redid it for Smiley Smile, but why would they keep the Smiley Smile version for the 2004 concert version in the 2011 box set? Why would why would they do that? Why would they completely revamp it again?
I am not them. Don't
I
ask
I
me.
I mean,
I don't know why they would do something like that. I think okay, here, I'll tell you why. Do you want to know the real reason why? Some people may say this is a theory, but it's not a theory to me because in the 1970s, like the long song, the stupid, like the things that like the punk rock really rebelled against,
yeah,
like Emerson, Lake and Palmer and Yes, and long songs by the Grateful Dead and In-A-Gadda-Da-Vida. Okay, at the beginning, long songs were fine. The Doors did like Light My Fire 7 minutes, and that was okay, that was just right. But endless jamming and it's basically what punk rock people call jack off music, right? However, in the 1970s, people who weren't paying attention to punk rock and thought it was a passing fad or something stupid, you know, they're thinking along the lines of, oh, there was a long version of Heroes and Villains, man. Smile was going to be heavy, and Heroes and Villains was going to be really long, man. You know, like we could smoke a lot of dope and listen to it and dig it forever. So that's what appeared in David Leaf's book, and it's what appeared in Brian Price's book, because everybody in those classic rock mentalities was thinking long heroes and villains.
Yeah. Ex
But
ex
in reality, it's part one and part two,
yeah.
like any like soul record from the 60s, where you played one side and you played the other. In fact, my best example is Bob Dylan's Like a Rolling Stone, which was too long for radio, so part one and part two. If you heard Rock and Rolling Stone on the radio in the 60s, the DJ would play one side of it and then he'd play the other side of it. And you never knew what lyrics you were going to be hearing when you were listening to Like a Rolling Stone. It was like, oh, which one is this? Oh, it's that one where he says this, or it's that one where he says that. That's how it was in the 60s, right?
Yeah.
And Heroes and Villains, this one here, these Heroes and Villains, that was like the Bob Dylan Like a Rolling Stone single where the same song is on both sides of the record. And there's so many, I mean, I know Beach Boys fans don't buy soul records, but soul records, you were dancing to them, and so you could flip them over, the part one and part two. That goes all the way back to Honky Tonk. Bill Doggett had a part one and part two, which the Beach Boys covered, not the hit version, part two. The Beach Boys covered part one of Honky Tonk. You
Yes.
got that? So
Yeah.
it wasn't Grateful Dead. Yes, ELP, long drawn out song. But I think that when Brian Wilson presents Smile, was the mentality of it's a long, heavy song was still there. And that's why they fucked it up.
I mean, back to back.
Barnyard wasn't in it. I'm in Great Shape wasn't in it. It was all Heroes and Villains on Brian Wilson Presents Smile, and the Smile box set's all fucked up.
I know. That's so
And
for
it's because that stupid hippie bullshit.
yeah. Um,
Okay?
yeah.
That's your answer.
Yeah. I love it. But they're kind of right. I mean, you listen to it back to back, part one and part two. It is 7 minutes, but it's not like, as you said, it's not one long song. It's part one and
Well,
part two.
part one is pretty short.
Yeah, it's only 2 minutes and 57 seconds. Part two,
Okay. So see now in my theoretical belief,
huh?
if Heroes and Villains part one and part two are released on a single, like with that original sleeve, the radio is going to be playing part one to start it off. But,
Mhm.
and I believe that would have taken off and charted very highly.
Yeah.
However, if that was popular, then that would have facilitated DJs playing the other side too. And who knows what would have happened? Maybe you would have been hearing once in a while part two because people would have been so fucking into the Beach Boys by then. It was like, wow, good vibrations. Wow, here's some villains. Here, that's more. Okay.
But
It could have been something that was also played on the radio because people just couldn't get enough.
on the
And I
album,
think that's what Brian was thinking, you know?
so yeah, so part one is 2 minutes and 57 seconds. Part two is 4 minutes and 20 seconds. But they would be back to back on the album, of course. So
Right.
technically, but it's not like you said. Technically, it's all heroes and villains, but it's not one song. But I get what you're saying. But going back again to my favorite Michael Vossi article, Michael Vossi said, quote, the best version I heard was an A-side, B-side version lasting about 6 minutes. And damn, that's exactly what it is when you put them back to back. It's what, 7 minutes.
People tried to tell me for years I was crazy on that one.
He says it.
All the ducks are lined up at this point. You know
He,
what I mean? We all know this shit.
he says it right here. A-side, B-side, 6 minutes. And when you add it up, it's, 6, 7 minutes. So how hard is it?
No, I mean, yeah, I think that, like, again, I just want to be clear about this. They would have played Heroes and Villains Part One on the radio. That would have been the hit. But there's a chance that following Good Vibrations and Heroes and Villains hit, then they might have been playing the B side a bit too, because people would have been getting a kick out of it. Because this is Brian's humor. That part two is really entertaining. It's got some crazy shit in it, but maybe it would have played too. He might have pulled something weird off and got away with it. Look, because the Beatles put out Yellow Submarine, right?
Yeah.
And Yellow Submarine is pretty fucking weird if you think about it, you know. And that's another thing about if you bring the Beatles into this story. Look at this single that John Lennon wanted to release with the Beatles originally, and then it was under the name Plastic Ono Band, and that's What's the New Mary Jane. Like, and that doesn't sound like a conventional song at all. But this is the fucking Beatles, and it's going to get instant airplay, and people are going to go, "Wow, you hear the new Beatles single?" Anyway, so oddball shit with the Beatles could happen, and I believe oddball shit could have happened with the Beach Boys too by that point.
Yeah. So February 10th, 1967, Brian says, and I'm quoting the article again, quote, he's on the phone talking with the journalist saying, quote, I'm doing the final mix on the A side tonight, but I can't decide what to do with the other side, end quote. And late that night, after 4 months and 18 sessions, Heroes and Villains Part One was finished. And I said, it's out there.
The most important thing about this is that he finished it one day after he handed in the lawsuit, and then he kept it.
Yeah,
He this is when Brian Wilson, says, we're playing this game now. We're suing you, and you're not getting the new single.
yeah.
Then a couple months later, he's like, well, maybe the new single won't even be Heroes and Villains. Maybe it'll be Vegetables. And
Yeah,
then he goes to Farmer's Market and takes the color picture, right? And then
exactly.
that's a promotional picture for a vegetable single that never happened. So,
We'll get into vegetables. So, but it's hidden away in the vaults, as I said. Mark Lynette finds it in 1988. But Mark Lynette only finds a copy of it. The original is
yeah,
lost. So, I mean, again, the stars are aligning. Thank God that the copy survived of the
I
finished
know.
Here's the Millions Part One. So Brian says on February 10th, as I said, I can't, I don't know what to do with the B side. But then 10 days after finishing part one, Brian began sessions for part two, which would encompass 9 more sessions and wrap on March 2nd, 1967. Okay. Now, part two, Mark Lynette told me that part two, is just, he put them all together in the order that they were on the reel. And then that's what became part
Yeah,
two.
that's what I mentioned that earlier.
Yeah.
Okay,
So,
now let me just say this about what was done on Brian Wilson Presents Smile to make the long hippie version
yeah,
of Heroes of Villains. Now, you know how there's all these sessions of Good Vibrations and there's another completely long mix of it and blah 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 blah. That version on Brian Wilson's Presents Smile is those guys taking all these weird Heroes of Villains tapes and getting the best shit they could find and sticking it all together the way that Good Vibrations, endless long Good Vibrations is too. They did the same thing. So this is what makes Smile longer, you know, and therefore, like Mark Linden has said in the past, well, it's too long. Look, it's on 3 sides. But had they cut that Heroes and Villains down and a few other things, it could have totally fit in. That Heroes and Villains, the long version on Brian Wilson Presents Smile, it's fun to listen to. It was great to be there at the concert, hearing all those parts and all that. But it isn't the original thing. It's just like the Good Vibrations long mixes from like with the Tony Asher lyrics, as far as I'm concerned, it's the same thing. It's like these are all they took amazing pieces that were never going to be used and threw them in there anyway.
yeah. So you write in Look, Listen, Vibrate, Smile, you say, quote, in the case of Heroes and Villains Part 2, all that remained was a tape reel with 3 sections that needed to be spliced together. These were obvious splices from their placement on the reel, and Mark Lynette also took cues from Brian's instructions to the group on the session reel. Brian Wilson is heard on these sessions coaching vocal parts and describing which sections precede and follow each other.
Yeah.
With this information, Lynette was able to reconstruct part two. At the end of these 3 sections, Lynette added the closing from the Smiley Smile version of Heroes and Villains. This edit was done in 1988. So, have you changed your mind on that? And have you changed your mind on that? Because
I
that
don't think there's any reason why that can't be there.
so so the ending of so the entire
I
so the entire ending of the Smile Smile version where he says, "I've my children were raised," all the way to the end, that's included.
I would.
Well, if you think about it, if we omit that whole part, and then when he says, "I've been in this town in the sunny down snuff," if we don't include that, then we're missing lyrics. You know what I mean?
And by the way, when do we know when that closing was cut?
June 14th, 1967.
Yeah, the Sunny Down Snuff part was cut on June 14th.
Yeah.
June June 14th, 1967.
That's when the session date was, yeah, on June 14th.
You do realize that June 7th was the Cool Cool Water. That's only 1 week after that Cool Cool Water thing was cut.
Mhm.
That to me is still qualifies as Smile. Do
So,
you know? Okay, look, here's the thing. I I am against this whole idea that Derek Taylor announcing Smile was scrapped in April. Brian Wilson did an interview that came out after the Derek Taylor interview, like a week or two after it. So he could have been interviewed 3 weeks, who knows? But the bottom line, Brian says, we're not going to stop. We're going to finish this.
yeah.
So Brian wanted to finish it, and he cut Love to Say Dada after Derek Taylor made that announcement. He cut the June 7th Cool Cool Water piece after the Derek Taylor announcement. He cut Sunny Down Snuff a week after that.
Mhm.
That's still Smile era to me. And the other thing that Mark Lynette always overlooks is that Carl Engelman and Brian were interacting in August of 1967, talking about a possible release of a 10-song Smile. And Brian did go back in the studio and dabbled with Cool Cool Water a bit there. So the ending of Smile with Derek Taylor's scrapped comment is not accurate. I think that's the Beach Boys wrestling control through Derek.
So the part two that's on the 45, the 2011 45, that's which does not have the whole Sundown Snuff, and it just has the remaining Heroes and Villains Part Two sections. Is that act? Which one do you pick? Do you pick the one that Mark Lynette did in 1988, where he added the Sunny Down Snuff and the entire ending of the Smiley Smile Heroes and Villains, or do we go with the 45 from 2011? How do we?
I told you, I think that if he cut that in June 14, and it's got Van Dyke's lyrics, you include that. I think Mark made a nice decision there, so it's okay for it to be at the end. I'm fine with that splice. I'm not going to say no, you can't have that splice. It wasn't cut right then, because again, it's part of the finishing process. If
It's
he
not
did
part.
cut it later, he's cutting something that he originally wrote in Smile era. So it's good. It's a great piece of music. Sunny Down Snuff. What a great line. I don't want to miss that. Do you?
No. So then, Vegetables is in April of 1967,
Yeah.
from April 4th to April 14th. So 10 days. And I listened to, and it was all recorded. Everything all recorded. And I listened to Brian's test edit. It's called the April Assembly. It literally sounds like he started editing it and then gave up after 30 minutes. I mean,
Yeah.
is that just how it went? That's just
Well, okay, look, I think that he had it ready, enough to like if he needed to release a record, he could have just edited it really quickly. He just left it as was and moved on to the next thing, which was Love to Say Dada,
yeah. So it
which got finished.
so all the pieces were there. It just wasn't properly edited together until 2011.
Well, I went to Alan Boyd's house a year before, the album box set was released in 2011.
Yes. So 20
Wait, it was like what month? Was it summer or was it fall?
Halloween of 2011.
Yeah. See, I told them, I says, don't try to meet a summer deadline. This is another thing. Okay, this is definitely like something that I did on that box set. Capitol Records was we can't release a Beach Boys record that, unless it's June. I said, fuck that. This is Smile. This isn't fucking summer in the fun shit, dude. This is Smile. Everybody's gonna come when it happens.
And it
And
was
okay, look, another thing, they didn't think that the box set was gonna sell through the first pressing. Capitol Records did not believe that the Smile Sessions box set would sell through the first pressing. They were doubtful Thomases about it to me about it, and I said, "Are you kidding?" And then you know what I did? I kind of pissed off those people later on after this. I kept on calling up. So, hi, the girl's name was Sarah. I said, Sarah, so what pressing is Smile in now? And like by the time they were in the seventh pressing of it, they said it's in its seventh pressing, Dominic. Oh, thank you.
It's like I told
See, no, fuck releasing it in June because it's fucking Beach Boys summer ass shit,
but
and it comes out in October and Halloween. Perfect, right? And then, oh, by the way, the rest.
but it
It
was
got, in other words, it got many, many, many pressings.
yeah,
It's
of
still in
course it
fucking
did.
print. And
And it
shut
was
the fuck up. Don't be repressive about Smile like you were in 1966. Capitol Records, fuck off.
and it was originally supposed to be released at Christmas, and it was supposed to be released in January '67.
Yeah, well, that's the 60s, though. That's the 60s. They could have done anything in the 60s.
Makes
But by the
sense.
time that fucking nostalgia market version of the Beach Boys happened, Capitol was thinking only summer releases for Beach Boys.
That box set goes for like $900 these days.
What is it out of print now?
I think so. It's like $900. The
Really?
cheapest one I found was like nine hundred
I
dollars.
thought it was still, well, you know what? It was in print for a long time.
Really?
It's
The
been, it's been, it's been now like what, 12, 13 years?
for
That box set stayed in print a long time.
so they wow because and even the 2004 Brian Wilson Presents Smile, that's expensive too. That goes for like $200. And the Small Sessions vinyl, just the album Small Sessions itself sequence goes for like $286. That's why I just so far that's why I just have this
Yeah.
that's why I just have the $30 box set or $40 box set. It has all the essentials.
All right. Well, again, it did a lot better than Capitol thought it was going to
Yeah.
do. And it went, I mean, the last time they answered my phone calls was on the seventh pressing. They did not think it was going to sell through the first pressing. Granted, some of the later pressings were less, less amount in the pressing, but the bottom line is, I know at least seven pressings, and it went more than that because a few years after that, I'd be showing up at the Barnes and Noble in Santa Monica, and here was, it was still on their shelf. I would go to record stores all over. Like I was traveling to New York all the time then. I'd go to San Francisco a lot because I was promoting my books. I'd go to England, and there it was. It was like on the fucking display shelves of all these stores all over because people wanted that. It was I mean, Capitol. Even this version of Capitol that did release it and did work on it didn't believe in it enough to like that it would sell through the first pressing. And I will never let them forget that because guess why? We need to do more.
Yeah,
So
absolutely.
don't doubt Thomas, don't doubt Dominic, don't doubt me. I'm telling them all. Anybody who like wants to riff battle on Smile, I've proven you wrong over and over and over again.
It's mind blowing that Vegetables was all recorded and ready to go, but it just wasn't properly assembled. Now, on here, it seemed like it was a on here. It seemed like the version that was released on here was just slapped together, was rushed.
Oh, they weren't ready yet. They didn't do like what Alan and I did.
Yeah,
They didn't have the patience for that yet.
it just sounds like it was quickly slapped together on here. But apparently, if my memory serves me right,
It was
Brian,
a rough version that
yeah,
Brian left unfinished. And by the way, those were really not mixed well. The rough versions that Brian left unfinished, but they were like it was almost a complete song, but it was like, also a rough version. If you would have heard the original mixes of those, like Mark had to do some work to make it like EQ it and everything like that because it was just slop, the
yeah,
way it was left, you know.
that's what I was
And
thinking.
so he mixed it right for the box set, and then eventually Ellen and I did the
Yeah.
one on the 45. Yeah.
So Brian personally requests that that after what? How many years ago? Seven. What, 40 after 44 years, Brian personally requests that vegetables finally be put together correctly, and it finally is. And you were there mixing it with Alan Boyd. Man, what a weird history for a weird and great song. I mean, it's all recorded, it's all there ready to go. Brian makes a test edits that are all over the place, and he gives up. And then later, It's correctly at his personal request. It's finally assembled in 2011. I mean, 44 years later. But there's a 10-second, I was talking to this the other night. There's a 10-second piano intro on the 2011 that technically that should or should not be there. Again, this is a detail that no one else but me probably,
Yeah, you're right. But
because
you know what? Let it be.
because every test mix doesn't have the piano. It goes right into.
Right.
But
But it's
they
fine.
but they removed it on the Made in California box set. Same mix, but they removed it. So maybe that was them going, you know, if you take this track and not the one on the Smile Sessions, because we were enslaved to the 2004 concert version. If you take this one, you can put that in you can assemble that. You know what I mean? Not assemble it.
Yeah, it's another really small detail
Yeah, it's very
need
small
to that would need to be honed because obviously they're having,
because
know
every
what they're doing.
every rough mix that Brian did, it goes directly into the I'm going to be. There's no piano. So anyway,
Right. Maybe so.
yeah.
Maybe that's probably how it should have been.
Yeah, and then
I mean,
make
all evidence, when you talk about evidence,
uh,
you have the evidence right there. Maybe that doesn't belong. But that
hence
small detail, I'm not the man to comment on that. I think you may be right.
hence why they removed it on the Buck and the Made in California box set.
Right.
On the Made in California box set, what they did do for Smile was they made in stereo all the songs that they could of Smile because everyone's like, "Whoa, why can't Smile be released in stereo?" It's like because there are elements that are missing. It's as we've said, stuff's missing. There are elements, original master, master multi tracks that don't exist anymore. So it's like we can only have a few songs of Smile in stereo. So people are like, "Whoa, why can't it be released in stereo?" It's not
Yeah.
possible. So at least Made in California did mix what they could of Smile in stereo. They did what they could. So at least props to them for that. So May comes along and Love to Say Dada is done in 3 days and put in the can, and that's it.
Right. And how many weeks after vegetables?
A month, 4 weeks.
Yeah, 3 weeks probably.
Yep.
About 3 weeks after vegetables was, like they stopped making vegetables. Then they took a break again. Again, this is lawsuit era.
Yeah, yeah,
And so they go back in and they cut Love to Say Dada and they finish it, right?
yeah.
2 weeks later, they go in and they cut Ooh, so cool,
So
cool.
for the, yeah, so
Ooh. So that's water, so and we put together just to, a rough sequence. You and I just, by meeting 2 days ago, put together a rough sequence of
how
what would have been the water part of the Elements suite, which got screwed up on the Brian Wilson Presents Smile, and then therefore got screwed up on the Smile box set.
yeah.
So and that would have been, you know, I Want to Be Around workshop, coo 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 water next, and then the Little Water chant, and then Love to Say Dada. All four of those in a row
Yeah.
made the water suite, and we don't have half of the water suite on the 2011 Smile. It's sad. It's really stupid, actually.
So for those that don't know who are listening, the viewers, a lot of people think that the final Smile session was May 18th, 1967. I love to say Dada. But however, 3 weeks later, Brian's back in the studio and they do Cool Cool Water.
Right. And that's like obviously a next section of the water suite.
And
And
people,
he goes in and he cuts My Children Are Raised a week after that or something. So
yes, yes, yeah,
yeah,
exactly.
so I mean, Derek Taylor's announcement of, Smile has been scrapped. How is that possible when Brian does at least three more Smile sessions?
Yeah. So in the summer of 1967, Derek Taylor comes out and announces Smile is scrapped. Scrapped. He just and it's scrapped for many different reasons that we mentioned. And but the My Children Were Raised session and the Cool Cool Water session.
Right. Well, there's something I want to read to you
Okay.
that I found from 1967 that was released after Derek Taylor's announcement of being scrapped by Brian Wilson that opposes what Derek Taylor says. And nobody ever fucking talks about this. They all act like it doesn't exist. But it's Brian Wilson talking about I'm still going to finish Smile in 1967.
Wow.
Hold on.
All right.
I'm getting out my Smile book for this one. This needs to be read because people don't understand it. Oh, you know what? The reason why I found it is because back in 1988, I put a little asterisk next to it. You can expect Smile to be the first LP issued by, oh God, look. You can expect Smile to be the first LP issued on Brother Records within the next 2 months. I'm not sure what the lyrics are all about, he admitted. I think it's more concerned with the harmonies. The Beach Boys have really got their record scene all sorted out now. There'll be no more hangups. He said that post Smiley Smile, that Smile was going to come out.
That's it right there.
Look, it's on page 133.
And when was this article right here?
It says August 26, 1967.
Wow. So it wasn't completely scrapped. As
No, because, okay, he goes, I'm not sure what the lyrics are all about, he admitted. I think it's more concerned with the harmonies. The Beach Boys have really got their record scene all sorted out now. There will be no more hangups.
so they're still yeah,
Yeah.
which it makes sense because later that year Brian started to re-record Surfs Up at the piano. Remember that?
And Cool Cool Water.
And Google, yeah, and he finished Heroes and Villains with the My Children Were Raised. Wow, that is
I don't,
overlooked. Wow, wow. So
wait a minute.
Smile wasn't dead on May 18th or May 18th.
Right.
No, it was not. That's amazing. That's amazing. Okay, so 1980s, Smile is long dead right now. And you, Darren Sahanaja, you who else?
Nick Walusko.
And Nick Belusco. You guys get your hands on all these tapes that are not publicly available, and you guys start to piece it's put the pieces, trying to find out where they go. Is that right? What was your
Yeah. At the time I was first getting all these tapes, shortly after I started getting them, I met Darian Sahanaja and Nick Walusko. And I had these guys to work with, and then eventually Probin Gregory. And the three of us, or four of us, whichever it was, because Probin came around a little later, you know, we were sitting there trying to go. So I didn't just count on myself.
yeah,
I counted on people who had, deep musical understanding of this kind of stuff. Because those guys were just as good then as they are now, I mean, they might be a little bit more improved in some ways, they may think, but they had all of their talent. Darian and Nick had their talent back in 1984 when I met them. And we were able to kind of, I would bring them the tapes and we would kind of go over them and try to figure out exactly which were the best takes of all of these things, which would be closest to what we can call, a finished version.
what was your methodology of like trying to figure out where things went sequence wise?
Well, we didn't have a lot to go on as far as print media yet. We had the Jules Siegel article, we had the Paul Williams article, and we had the Teen Set article, Smile, Brian, and Pull Those Strings.
Mhm.
But then we also had the tape, and we could hear Brian talking on the tape. So a lot of clues to as far as the order goes came from that. And ironically, I don't know where this list came from, but there was a list in a book done by Ken Barnes called The Beach Boys in Words and Pictures or something. Ken Barnes worked with Greg Shaw at Who Put the Bomb, and he must have had some strange access in the 70s because he had this weird list. And I kind of took that list and I said, well, this is some kind of an order, right? Because there was the order on the back of the Smile jacket to
Yeah,
so between those two lists, we were able to write that list, and then the list that was in the Ken Barnes book gave us, kind of a starting point to like kind of assemble. And then that's where then we started listening closer to the tape or reading things that were said in those articles back in the 60s and started, you know,
yeah,
trying to place them and then trying to understand like musical notation. Like if a bass line went dun 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 dun, dun and
yeah.
then dun 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 dun, we kind of would try to figure out how to put that together. And also some of the rough tapes that we heard were like I just mentioned a piece from Child is Father of the Man. Well, we actually heard one that was edited together, I remember. And we said, aha, so we were right about that. So again, all these things, it took a few years for them to fall into place. And then we had a pretty good concoction of what Smile sequence was. That appeared in Look, Listen, Vibrate, Smile. And then
In 1988.
course, other things. Yeah, in 1988. So it took us about 5 years to come up with that sequence. I mean, by listening to tape and analyzing with the articles that we had. This is the original. This page here, 102. Take a look at that.
Oh, wait a minute. So this was your original sequence right here.
Yeah, but I changed it by the end of the book because of new information.
Okay.
Look, look, heroes and villains.
Yeah, I see that.
Okay, I fucked up. Our prayer should be before that.
What?
You know
Ooh.
why? Because we hadn't heard the tape yet where Brian said this is a little intro.
Oh, wow.
At our prayer before Cabinessence, that's the way it appeared on 2020. Then do you dig worms? That's correct.
Yeah,
Because Barnyard and Old Master Painter aren't even,
yeah,
I'm in great shape, aren't even mentioned here.
yeah,
Okay. Old Master Painter, you're my sunshine. Wonderful. That's correct.
yeah. So this
No, no,
is
no, no, no. It is, yeah. But because Cabinessence should be there. But then Wonderful Child Smiley Fan, that's right. Sunshine should be in front of Cabinessence. And then vegetables, wind chimes, are getting the elements correct here.
yeah,
Vibrations is in the wrong place, but then cow and water are in the right place. Surfs up belongs over here. So you know what? I had it out of order.
yeah.
Are good vibrations, surfs up, and cabinessence. You know what? Even though a lot of the big songs are out of order,
Yeah.
the little songs are in order.
Yeah. So this right here on page 102 of Look, Listen, Vibrate, Smell, this was the original sequence that you and Darren Sanaja came up with originally. And then it turned into, in 1995, this that is on page 287 here.
Because of new information.
And was it the basis, the starting point of the 2004 concert? Yeah.
Look, see, Mrs. O'Leary's cow, and then it says, I'm in great shape.
Well, I'm in great shape is I want to be around slash workshop because that's the name it was given. Yeah. That's the name it was given. But the actual I'm in great shape is supposed to be right above barnyard, you
Yeah, it
see?
should be with Barnyard.
Yeah, but yeah.
Well, this is pretty close. Then after Barnyard and I'm a great shape, do you dig worms? The old master painter, you're my sunshine. See, I have here it says she's going bald.
It's supposed to be he gives speeches.
That's what I meant.
Yeah, yeah,
Cabin Essence is where Surf's Up ended up being.
Yeah. So the
Cabin Essence goes after You Are My Sunshine. So Good Vibrations would go at the end, Surf's Up goes here, and then it's all correct.
yeah. So the
Wow. It's, you know what? You have to admit, not bad.
I
Not bad. Because Cabin Essence being where Surf's Up ended up is the right kind of thing, but it's the wrong one.
let me tell
That's
you,
the biggest mistake. And I got who corrected it? Who corrected that mistake?
Brian.
Thank you.
Yeah. You know what? When I first listened to your sequence right here in Look, Listen, Vibrate, Smile that we were just talking about,
Yeah.
and I heard it together, and I heard it for the first, I listened to it for the first time, I thought, wow, I am like, this is it. I'm actually understanding it and hearing and like everything just faded away. The legend, the lures, the inertia, as you call it, everything
Yeah.
faded away. And it was just about the music and just about the story that it told and just the imagery and the feeling and everything. And it was just amazing. And then the other day, the other day, so it's perfect, awesome, loving it. And then the other day, you told me, oh, it's actually a bit tweaked. It's actually a bit updated nowadays, but not much, just a little bit, just a little bit. So there was an interview that you did probably 2 or 3 years ago where you said that you and Darren Sanaja, figured out a long time ago what the smile sequence was. And when I heard that again a few years ago, I was like, what is it? And then you said that you and Alan Boyd in 2010, before the year before the 2011 box set, put together Smile, how it actually was supposed to be in 1967. And you said, and I have that CD back right here. And my brain was going, ask him the next question. What's the sequence? And the next question the interviewer asked you was, what about he gives speeches?
Yeah, I
It
know.
was like he told you he has the CD right behind him, and you're asking him about he gives speeches? It's like, what the actual so there's so much, legend and lore on Smile. It really takes away from the music itself, which is supposed to be what it's all about. The damn music, you know what I mean? And it's like, people say, who was it who said Smile is a mess? Was it Alan Boyd who said?
Alan Boyd said that to me like like 2 years before we were called into Capitol Records to actually do the box set. And I said, "No, Alan, let me come down to your house and I will show you."
Where why do people say that oh Smile is a mess like Alan Boyd had said? They think, oh, it's just in all these pieces and who knows what take, because like each song had a determined master take. So I have no idea why some people say, "Oh, we have no idea how the album would sounded." So like the ending of Wind Chimes was recorded, as we said, on August 3rd, 1966. Take number three was, circled as the best. When Look was recorded, take number 20, that was circled as the best. So it's not like where does this come from that people think, oh, Smile is just this, it's just fragments and who knows what take this verse would have been. It's because it was all determined from the beginning. Like Wonderful, that was take number seven. I mean,
Okay, okay. Remember what I told you about the sycophant culture,
yeah,
Hollywood?
yeah.
All right. So I think inertia is the answer to your question. The people, okay, listen, this is really, really, really important. It's still happening. Okay. I hate to say this because there's a lot of Beach Boys fans looking at this, but there are a lot of Beach Boys fans who don't think about anything else but the Beach Boys. Okay. You understand that, right? So they're not looking at the big picture. And what they're thinking about is the general inertia of Smile overall. Like, like Mike Love was pounding it home year in and year out in the 80s during Reagan times.
Yeah.
That Smile was drug-addled mess. Okay.
Mhm.
And in order to be, oh, I'm kissing your ass,
Yeah.
you know, people kind of were afraid of that music. These are people who are into nothing but the Beach Boys. They're not into Dylan. Okay. They're not into Frank Zappa or anything like that. Right. They're
Mhm.
just into the Beach Boys and they play this safety first bullshit. And it scared a lot of people to even like think of going there. But I was not there. I was always a Dylan fan. I was always a Birds fan. Shit, I became a Birds fan in 1965. My sister's best friend Sharon Tessler had the Tambourine album when it first came out. I saw the picture of Dylan on the back of the album. At a 5-year-old kid in 1965, I said, "I see. Greenwich Village is coming to Los Angeles now because Ciro's the picture of the club on the Sunset Strip."
Yeah.
I knew all that when I was a 5-year-old kid. I wasn't scared of Bob Dylan. I wasn't scared of like political ramifications of like liberal stuff, which a lot of Beach Boys fans were. So if Alan Boyd is saying something like it's a mess, it's only because he's following the pattern of inertia of everybody else who was listening to Mike Love say no.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Fuck that. And that's who I am. I'm the person more than anybody else except for David Leaf who said Mike Love on Smile. Smile is great. Mike Love is wrong.
Amen.
Sorry, that's me.
Amen. Amen.
I had to be an asshole because he was.
and yeah, and today he says, "Oh, he loves it," and he just had a problems with
Oh
some.
no, 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 not now. He's reversed it. He only said that to promote the box set. Now on the new Disney documentary, he's reversed it. And
Yeah.
he's saying Surf's Up wasn't appropriate for the Beach Boys. Who allowed Mike Love to say Surf's Up was not appropriate for the Beach Boys in the new Disney documentary? Whoever that is should have it excised from the film because that's bullshit.
Exactly. Exactly. So yeah.
Come on, man.
So
I mean, okay, listen, the first Grammy the Beach Boys ever won was for Smile. So eat that.
yeah. Exactly. Exactly. And we'll
I'm
get.
starting to sound like a mobster now. Okay.
No, no.
I'm Italian. What can I do?
It's amazing. Keep this is exactly what we need.
Okay.
I'm looking for. All right.
I knew that not only did I told Darian and Nick in 1984 when I first met them, you guys are good enough to be the Beach Boys band. They played That's Not Me. They played I Know There's an Answer for Me the very first time I sat in a room with them.
Yeah.
And I said, these are songs that the Beach Boys would never do. I wish you guys were their band.
You foretold the future. That's the first time you foretold the future.
Well, okay, and so,
They did. Yeah. Ended up.
I mean, that's who we were. We were kids and we were amateurs, but guess what? In one year, I was one of the research guys for the movie The Beach Boys an American Band with Malcolm Leo, which to me is still the best Beach Boys documentary ever made.
Oh, absolutely.
So, in 1984, I was 1 year away from being a contributor to the American Band video. Darian and Nick were probably many years away from being Brian's band, but they eventually became that. So, we were, again, just amateurs at the time, but we had this sort of Southern California, Hollywood kind of access where I knew Kurt Betcher, and Darian ended up working in a studio that had some of the tapes. So there, we had some more access and we therefore had time to study. And looking at it now, it's just good fortune that it landed in our laps.
Yeah.
What I didn't do is any contemporary interviews. I only referenced vintage interviews
Yeah.
because I feel a lot of the contemporary interviews are full of misnomers
Yeah.
full of lies. I just went with original tape box. If Brian wrote it on a tape box in 1966, if Brian said it in an interview in 1966, then, or if it's, a session worksheet from 1966, then, or if there's a tape and we're hearing Brian say something one of the tapes, like this is going to be an intro to the album,
Yeah.
like, right, the famous one for Our Prayer. Well, you know, then I know about it and I consider that real. I don't go with heebie jeebies ever. I just go with what's on fact, retro 1960s, no later. I don't care about what people said later unless they really give us something that illuminates, but I don't think there's a grand amount of illumination from later on. Outside of Derek Taylor's 1975 article, like Michael Vossi in 1969, and then that, that's so close to the thing. Surf's Up being recorded in 1971, that counts
Yeah.
because it's long enough ago. But then when you start going 30 years, 40 years later to Brian Wilson, who's, has problems really being as, he didn't speak as well as he did in the old days. I mean, Marilyn Wilson talks about Brian would write her letters and he was brilliant in his letters. He would just, he sounded like a genius. When people hear Brian Wilson talk, in the last 30 years or so, they compare him to Bill Murray in Caddyshack. You know, that Brian Wilson was not Bill Murray in Caddyshack in 1966. Okay. So his interviews from then are a lot more revealing to me, and I take them a lot more seriously than, the things that he says later on, which is often conflicting information. And I can't get involved in bullshit. I want to know what happened in the 60s, and that's it.
Yeah. And that's such a good point. That's absolutely such a good point. So in 1988, Capitol was talking about releasing Smile. Is that right? Mark Lynette he said that Capitol was looking to release Smile and for him to
Okay.
go through the vaults.
Okay. Let me tell you what happened.
All right.
So I reprinted it in the revised edition, the tape box listing that Mark Lynette created for that piece of research.
Mhm.
I have the tape too, because, I was helping to help figure things out at the time. Um, Capital wasn't really gung ho serious yet, but what happened was that Landy was saying, okay, drag that stuff up. We can make money on this.
Oh, really?
Landy was the first person to, say we're going to do this, and then, talk to Capitol and say, okay, we'll consider it, because, before the Brian Wilson solo album in 1988, as far as the world was concerned, Brian was still a waste case. It took the 1988 album for, people who had not forgotten Brian's performance on Saturday Night Live. You probably don't even know about that because you're so young, but dig this. Brian Wilson appeared on Saturday Night Live, and his singing on the show was so bad. And it came right when the Brian is back promotion was everywhere. And what did the public say? Brian is not back. He's fucked up.
Yeah.
That's what the public opinion of Brian Wilson was until the 1988 album. So Capitol probably didn't take releasing Smile so seriously. It was something that Landy was trying to get off the ground.
The Beach Boys took a vote on it, and they voted no, not to release that stuff, not to release it in 1988.
I've never heard about that.
I got that from Mark Lynette. He said that ultimately.
Well, okay, if that happened, then it shows you where their heads were at. And I
So
don't remember there being a vote, but if Mark Lynette says there was a vote, then there was.
crazy how Landy planted some sort of seed that eventually, anyway. But
Well, Landy also, got Brian going on a solo career, right?
absolutely, absolutely.
I mean, he's a paradox.
Yeah, he is.
Look, Landy did things that are not even documented in books. Okay. He also, helped Brian get a smile career going. He made Brian into a. Brian was what, over 300 pounds,
Yeah.
and he brought Brian, but again, the problem with Landy is he took it too far. Fuck him.
So it's weird how the band took a vote to not release a Smile album in 1988, but then in 1993 on the box set, of course, on the 1993 box set, we get, to the shock of everyone, we get 30 minutes of Smile.
Yeah,
First,
this is really interesting.
first,
Okay. Now,
okay,
1993 is Landy's kind of getting out of the picture by then, right?
yeah,
Now, one of the reasons why the Beach Boys aren't going to be like, approving of a Smile release during the Landy period is because they don't really want to work with Landy.
yeah,
So that's to their credit, in a way. Here's what happened about the Smile tracks getting on there. They were afraid of doing that. Now, I was, of course, encouraging it, right?
yeah,
But like, here's what the idea was. They might deny this now, but I remember very clearly they decided to make a list of all songs that were Smile songs
hmm
that were previously released song titles, not tapes, but song titles. Wind chimes, vegetables, wonderful. And then when they made the compilation, see, the Beach Boys just saw a list of songs. They went,
yeah,
okay. They didn't know that that was the Smile versions. They just signed off on, okay, Wonderful's going to be on there, fine. Wind chime's going to be on there, fine. Vegetables going to be on there, fine. Thinking they were the already released Smiley
yeah,
Smile versions and
yeah.
shit, right? And then that was how it was going to come out, but with the original Smile song. But by the time it was mastered by Capitol, the Beach Boys would, whoa, wait, like that's what would have happened. See, but I told them, I says, you guys, stop being pussies. Why don't you put Do You Like Worms on there? I mean, what a fucked up title, right? Like, that was a title that wasn't on a previous Beach Boys album. And have some fucking balls, dude, because everybody involved with this was a man at that time. So let's just say this. Okay, this is at a time when, it was transferring over to Landy, between Landy and Melinda. I believe Van Dyke was cutting Orange Crate art with Brian at the time. Andy Paley was cutting those tapes with Brian at the time. So there's this transitional period when Landy's going and Melinda's going to come in. And right in that time was a golden moment, for reasons I'll just explain later. But so the Beach Boys sign off on those tracks. And then I say, okay, since they sign off, why don't you add some? And so eventually they get Do You Like Worms on there.
So you're the reason why the finished Do You Like Worms was released on the 1993 box set. So are you saying that they tricked the Beach Boys into like, oh, wonderful, oh yeah, not knowing
Yeah, they did. They
Mark
consciously tricked the band for a while there. But
because
but eventually they approved.
but
It was
Mark
fine. It went, but the thing is, in the early stages of getting the list to the band, they were tricking them. And
yeah,
then once the whole thing was just mastered or about to be mastered or everything, I mean, it was just too much bullshit for them to try to fucking re-undo it. So, fuck it, it's out.
and even
And there it is. We got it.
and Mark Lynette admitted that they did it. He admitted what you just said to me about what they did to try and keep it under. Oh, wonderful, yeah, not knowing it was the original.
Yeah. No, actually, I know that was just, for us at the time, it was a scary proposition because we didn't know if it was going to work or not. Right. But actually doing it was pretty fun.
That's ballsy. That's a
Yeah. But but then I said, fuck that. Now let's put on Do You Like Worms? And,
yeah.
and love to say Dada on there too.
Let's say Dada.
And so that's another title
And
that
the
ended up getting added as well because I broke the chain of like, stop the fucking, okay, it's time to stop the game of just putting those titles in. Let's actually get some, can we use some real fucking Smile material? Thank you.
the original Cool Cool Water from June 7th, 1967. Yeah, that was on there too. So, in David Leaf's updated book, God only
Yeah.
knows,
I haven't read that yet. I'm reading the new one just now.
he says, quote, in 1993, Brian and I had gone over a possible track listing for Smile. Working at the kitchen table of his home with a pile of 3x5 index cards, the name of each song on a card, Brian and I tried to create a Smile song sequence. Nothing came of it. So I guess he just wasn't in the right mood. It wasn't time yet, right? It
Yeah,
wasn't time yet.
Brian was still,
Yeah.
in his new book, David's new book, and he talks about, the stages. And I remember all the stages very, very, very well of Brian coming to grips with that material.
Yeah.
Probably the biggest one was I was at the Radio City Music Hall show. I was living in New York at the time when they did that benefit that David actually wrote the benefit to Brian Wilson, and they played Heroes and Villains, okay, at that. And for Brian to play that in a concert like that was a major, major, major thing.
Yeah.
There were stages of every, acceptance of this. Darian did a lot of that work actually, because Darian would just like they would play all these obscure Beach Boys songs like Cuss the Machine,
Yeah.
that the Beach Boys band would never ever have played, right?
Yeah.
And in doing that, he would also suggest Smiles tracks. And Darian is the real genius behind this one, okay? Because little by little by little, Darian said, "Hey, why don't we play vegetables? Hey, why don't we play wind chimes? Hey, why don't we play, blah blah blah." And eventually, the
So
Brian Wilson band learned almost every Smile song except one, and the one they didn't learn was
happening.
because Jeff Foskett. I can say it now, okay, because I don't want to hurt his feelings as a living person, but you know, Jeff Foskett was like, "No way, man, we're not going to play that," because you understand, Jeff Foskett had come from many, many, many years of playing with the Mike Love band, so he was in that inertia mode I spoke of earlier, the Mike Love inertia kind of crap, the Smile inertia, right? So again, Alan's inertia was same as Jeff's inertia. Anything towards Smile, they were all like, "Oh, I'm scared," you know, and so you know, Foskett, having been in the Beach Boys band, like I'm going to give you an example of the kind of arguments that the band would have with Jeff Foskett. They were playing "Help Me, Rhonda" the way the Beach Boys had been playing it in their concert tours since about 1971, since the Grateful Dead jam. Okay, the "Help Me, Rhonda" in the live concerts throughout the 70s and throughout the 80s and all the way into the 90s and even into the Brian Wilson band with Jeff Foskett was the Grateful Dead band jam version of "Help Me, Rhonda." It did not sound like the hit record by the Beach Boys. It sounded like the Grateful Dead jam version. So
Yeah.
Darian decided, okay, let's go back to the hit version of "Help Me, Rhonda" and do that arrangement with the bow, 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 and all the rock and roll stuff, right? That the Dead version had deleted. The Beach Boys, Grateful Dead. Okay, so and Jeff Foskett's attitude was, "I know how to play "Help Me, Rhonda." I've been playing it with the Beach Boys for 20 years. And Darian had to say, "Yeah, but that's not the way the single is. We want to play it like the single." Eventually, they won that battle, right? So there was also like the Battle of Cabanescence, right? And
Yeah.
Darian was really in a fragile spot right there. And I said, he called me up and he told me about it. And I got to say, Darian and I haven't been as close of friends since the 80s as we were during the 80s. But once in a while, we reconnoiter on important things like this. So he contacted me and we went to Highland Grounds, which was like the best coffee house in Los Angeles at the time. And we had this really serious discussion about what he was up against with Jeff Foskett denying that track. And by the way, I allude to this in my book, Smile, the Story of Brian Wilson's Lost Masterpiece. I didn't call out Foskett in the book. Okay. But I got so many people who read that piece in the book that's saying, "Oh, well, who was the person who was trying to block Cabin Essence. I didn't tell anybody, in the book, but I told them in person if they, emailed me or something like that. But yeah, boss. So once, I talked to Darian, he says, you got to go in there and kick ass, whatever I had to do. And so Darian went in there and he went balls out and he won that battle and they learned how to play Cabin Essence. That's all they needed to do a Smile tour.
Yeah.
Darian was the one who worked those songs in one by one. So we got to thank Darian for that.
But it made
Ellen and I knew what was coming, but because it was inevitable as far as money making goes for the band and for the label. That was just the inevitable thing. Brian Wilson Presents Smile, did so well, and they won a Grammy for Best Instrumental Record on Fire.
yeah.
So it was inevitable that the Beach Boys version was going to have to be released. So I called Alan one day and I said, you know what? Nobody said anything yet, but it's going to happen, Alan. And he goes, yeah, I know.
I'm
But
just
Alan didn't have, and what blows my mind about all this is that, myself and Van Dyke Parks do not have Grammy Awards for that box set.
why?
We deserve Grammy Awards. Van Dyke does not have one, and I do not have one.
Why?
The whys and the wherefores is okay. So there was a guy, I believe his name was Dennis, who was kind of managing the project, and then there's Mark Lynette and Alan, and they engineered it, and there's Brian Wilson. I think there's a limit unless the band or the label requests somebody else gets one too. And the way corporate shit works in Hollywood, I'm a punk rock outsider and they can fuck me. And that's basically what happened. And as far as Van Dyke Parks goes, I mean, Van Dyke Parks made a great sacrifice for his friend, cover artist Frank Holmes, because they didn't want to pay Frank Holmes for his artwork. They claimed that they owned it, but it was the only thing Frank Holmes ever did. I mean, and he, since they didn't release the album, possesses the rights for the Smile album cover. And he says, fuck you. If you fucking release that shit, and then Van Dyke went to the boards for Frank Holmes. And because of that, Van Dyke then was not involved in any other aspects of the project because all the money went to Frank Holmes. And they figured if they hired Van Dyke, then they have to give him money too. And, they didn't want to do that. But can you hold on for 1 second? Let me show you how Van Dyke Parks signed my box set.
Oh wow. Wow, let's see.
See what it says? Van Dyke Parks, comma, Googled.
Wow.
Van Dyke Parks, Googled. So
Google.
he was not happy with his not being included, but the reason why he wasn't included was because he had to go to the boards for Frank Holmes to properly get his money for this wonderful cover, which, uh, you know, uh, since we're here,
Does it light up?
does it?
Does it or no?
Does it? Does she or doesn't she?
Oh,
Only the hairdresser knows for sure.
how many of those there were less of those made. That's incredible. Because how many light up ones were made? Just
I don't know.
not a lot, right? Oh my gosh.
Yeah. Yeah, they didn't want to pay Frank Holmes for his artwork. Van Dyke had to go to the mat for that. And look at what an important element of Smile that was.
Wow.
By the way, I also have my copy signed by Guy Webster.
Of course.
And of course,
Bruh, of
the
course.
band, Brian Wilson and Frank Holmes.
Wow. Wow.
I wish I could have gotten Michael Vosse and David Anderle.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
I really wish. Now I knew both of those men. David Anderle defended me when a lot of there is a fan board a long time ago that talked about Smile constantly. And there was a guy who was selling people CD burns of Smile material that they did not have. And this guy was saying Domenic Priore's crazy. Domenic Priore's theories are shit. Heroes and Villains Part 1, 2. What a horrible fucking thing. Blah, 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 blah. And then he got a bunch of these sycophant people to go along with him. And he's a fucking bootlegger, right? And all these people were agreeing with him. Dominic's crazy. Dominic's fucking crazy. I get that shit all the fucking time. I'm funny, maybe sometimes, but I'm not crazy. Okay. And this fucking bootlegger did that shit. And guess what happened? David Anderley got on the fucking board and said, no, you're wrong. Domenic Priore's right. Shut the fuck up.
Wow.
That ended that. Thank you, David Anderley.
Well,
And, so David Anderley knew that what I was, these things we're talking about, that I'm talking about, are backed up by David Anderley. They're backed up by Michael Vosse, two really with it guys who went on, like David Anderley went on to produce the Flying Burrito Brothers with Graham Parsons next. Okay. I mean, a bunch of other stuff, but for me personally, my favorite would be Graham Parsons and Flying Burrito Brothers, Gil the Palette of Sin. You know, that is one of the great albums, right? I mean, it's the Americana, like, Holy Grail, right? So, I mean, I got support from those people who are outside of the Beach Boys sycophant world. Yeah. So, I mean, and they were there, the closest people to Brian Wilson at the time. Michael Vosse told me that if I'd been around in 1966, I would have broke through all those pussyfoots and told them how to do it right. Because he was, Michael Vosse really did tell me this. If you were around in 66, Smile would have been finished. And I think if you were there with me, it would be even better.
oh, guys, I paid him $100 to say
No,
that.
you didn't.
I'm
I
just
mean, you've done a really great job. I mean, I can't remember where all these pieces were released anymore because it's been so piecemeal, including, okay, there's a whole box set, but there's all this piecemeal Smile all over the place.
it took forever because it was like, okay, I'm getting two different stories of Smile. This is like 5 years ago. I was like, on one hand, I'm getting inertia, legend and lores and all that, and on the other hand, I'm reading like your book and Keith Badman's book, and it's like, okay, this thing was almost complete. This thing is not in pieces. It was
No, it's
Brian,
so close. It's
Brian
so
Brian
close.
had everything in his head. Almost every song was finished, and it.
But remember what Paul Williams said, that if Brian Wilson would have released what he'd, done already by December of 1966, it would have been better than most of the things that were out there.
You
It
know,
was already groundbreaking.
yeah.
Everything he cut by December 66 was already groundbreaking. And he
Yeah.
hadn't even done Heroes.
Through the years, I've literally come to the conclusion that that Smile, this album right here, really encapsulates every thought, every dream, every emotion, every feeling, every smell, every sight, every sound, every single thing there is. You can pretty much find in this album.
Yeah. In the 60s, Dennis Wilson said, Smile is so good it makes Pet Sounds stink. That's how good it is.
So just so I can sleep at night, that I finally got it correct. The sequence: Our Prayer, Heroes and Villains Part 1, Heroes and Villains Part 2, I'm in Great Shape, Barnyard, Do You Like Worms, The Old Master Painter / You Are My Sunshine, Cabinescence, Bicycle Rider, He Gives Speeches, Wonderful, Look, Child is Father of the Man, Surfs Up, Vegetables, Holidays, Wind Chimes, Fire, I Want to Be Around / Workshop, Cool Cool Water, then The Water Chant, then I Love to Say Dada, and then Good Vibrations and You're Welcome.
Yeah, that would be like the most, like, of all these years of research, we came pretty close. Like in the very first, like 1988 version, we had three of the most important songs out of place.
Yeah.
Okay. And then in the 1995 research, we kind of improved that here and there a little bit. But ultimately, when Brian Wilson said Surf's Up belongs here, we realized that Cabinescence and Good Vibrations were also out of place.
Yeah.
So we had to reshuffle those to where they belonged.
It's pretty.
There was some, it should have been obvious to us, but it wasn't. And it became obvious once Brian put Surf's Up where it belonged. Then,
So what I read just now is the sequence. It's
yes, yes, that would be the correct sequence of the concept album that would have been Smile, which, it's kind of like
it's
short. We've come short so far, I think.
it's like 95% the same as the 2011 sequence, but it's not. But the versions, the
It's
version,
and they have the versions, and it's missing the water.
yes.
Like only part of the like half of the water is missing.
And so for people to say, "Oh, well, this can't be correct," it's like 95% of Brian's finished version of it. So it's like, yeah, it is it. You know what I mean? I mean, you can't argue with this because this is like I said, 98.58% of Brian's sequence that he when he
Well, when Brian finally released it, yeah, I mean,
so yeah, that's I can sleep at night now. Hopefully
well,
others.
no, we it's just a matter of, finding the right, versions,
Yeah,
the original, as
yeah,
close to original as possible. You know,
exactly,
I
exactly.
mean, and I mean, Cabin Essence and Surf's Up were finished later,
Yeah,
okay, but everything else was pretty much finished, in 66, 67,
yeah.
and
Bri-
uh
Brian was so close to being done. Everything was completed except for I'm in Great Shape was missing vocals, Barnyard was missing vocals, and Cabinescence was missing Home on the Range vocals.
well, but that got finished in 68. So
I know. And Surfs Up was not finished, but but Cabinescence was finished in 1968, and
and Surf's Up was finished in 71.
1971. So really, it ultimately boils down to missing vocals.
Also, the verses on Do You Like Worms, remember?
Yeah, we'll have to tackle that, but
You're not going to get original of that.
yeah,
It
but
doesn't exist, and that's it.
yeah, but
Unless Dury Parks' acetates have it.
so that plus the album jacket being complete, plus the single sleeves being complete, plus the booklets being complete. This thing was like 98, 99% finished.
Yeah, yeah. There was just like, like I said, Barnyard, I'm in Great Shape.
Yeah,
The
that's it.
vocals weren't done on those, and neither was like the verses of Worms.
And
And
yeah,
and Brian left it in 67. He also didn't finish Home on the Range, and he didn't edit together Surf's Up,
but
And
then finished.
Vegetables was left in a very unedited state. But shit, man, you know how long it would have taken him to finish that?
Yeah,
Like Brian could have done that in like maybe 2 weeks.
and
But
unfortunately,
remember, there were weeks that he didn't work. He didn't work for 3 weeks after Vegetables.
yeah,
We didn't work for 2 weeks after Dada.
it could have been
That
finished.
all could have been done, but the lawsuit was happening during that time.
He could have knocked it out in one day. Just vocals for "I'm in Great Shape" and "Barnyard" and fix Cabinescence of Surf.
Yeah, it could have been done even quicker. Like you're saying one day, I said 2 weeks, but the bottom line, within a few days, he could have done it all.
And again,
Which means we could do it all in 2 days.
yeah, and again, unfortunately, the vocals for "Look" are missing, but that's just the way
Yeah,
life.
I don't think that's important.
Yeah,
Like you said about instrumentals.
but other than that, it's 98, 99% finished. I mean, this let's talk about real quickly about what needs to be done for Smile in the future. How Smile is not dead and how it needs to be released like this.
Well, that sequence, plus, finding the best versions of them that are as close to original. Uh, as possible, which would include, of course, the finishes of Surf's Up and Cabanescence from 68 and 71, I believe.
Yeah.
And then, I think there's a video element here too, where you get, the good vibrations, promotional film. And then you go out and get like performances that the Beach Boys did of Surf's Up on Gangala du Disc. You get good vibrations from their Paris concert in 69, which is probably the best live version of it that we have. You get Heroes and Villains from Central Park. You get Cool Cool Water from the Mike Douglas show. And somehow, I mean, there must be somewhere in the world a copy of Vegetables on the David Frost show.
Yeah.
Because that seems to be missing at this point, but I got a feeling that can't be missing.
So these music videos, these videos were supposed to be for the 2011 box set, but they were canceled, right? And you were supposed to direct.
Yeah,
You're supposed to
right.
direct it.
I was supposed to, yeah, right. I was supposed to produce the DVD thing and also the press kit videos, which got taken away because Melinda found somebody that owned a camera and could, interview them about things he barely knew about. So that was ridiculous. This is another thing Melinda did was to, instead of, I was hired to do the job by Capitol Records, and she came to Capitol and says, "No, don't let Domenic do that. I got a guy who can shoot the videos with the band." And so, they got some novice guy to interview the Beach Boys about Smile instead of me.
Yeah. So
Thank you, Melinda.
really, a few more things could be done. Maybe on like a record store day, as you said in one of your as a
Oh, I think it's beyond record store day,
or just at least or why not even digital? I mean, even or a limited release.
right? Yeah, yeah. It could come out as a regular, like they put a Pet Sounds thing out that had a video element, and this could be just like that. It could be Smile, because remember, Pet Sounds has been out a million times too. So Smile could come out with this new version of it, like what I would call I would think that also releasing that in mono would be the best.
Yeah, yeah,
And a mono version of Smile that is close to the 1966 version as as it can be, instead of the remixed version that they did on the box set. And then you add the video element, because there was a Pet Sound CD that also had a video element too. And so this would be just like that.
yeah.
It's
So
been
yeah,
done before with Pet Sounds, and it could be done again with Smile.
child is not dead. It is not dead.
Mm, mm, mm.
So final statement. How do you want people to remember Brian Wilson's masterpiece?
It's got a good start already. I mean, I think that what's going to be happening with this, especially if there's this more accessible version that's, cheap and always available to buy instead of something that's out of print now, you continue to, have people hearing it through the years. It's just going to become the Beach Boys masterpiece. The way people had previously said it was Pet Sounds, Smile is it, I mean, that's all.
When I, you know what, whenever I introduce Smile to friends of mine, whether it be coworkers, friends, family, all I do is I say, "Hey, listen to this cool album from the 1960s." It's all I say. No baggage, no legend, no nothing. Just Smile as is, just the music as it was always intended to be, and they love it.
Yeah.
Hopefully, it can get to that point. Just say, "Hey,
Well, the Beach Boys were, along with the Rolling Stones and the Beatles, the most popular groups of the 60s.
yeah,
And the Beach Boys did not continue that popularity after, Smile fell apart. So this is, closing the door on that. And it will probably help people to, again, further recognize the Beach Boys' place in that pantheon of the Rolling Stones and the Beatles, as we knew that in the 60s. But, time passes and people like lose track of the fact, but those were the big three, and then Bob Dylan as a solo artist.
Dominic, I cannot thank you enough from the bottom of my heart."
Well, thank you. I really appreciate your you appreciate your well researched and well thought out, science, because you've done all this based on, the work that we did in all these different projects, and now, you know them as a fan, and you're starting anew and going forward, which is important.
Hey, Dominic, thank you so much. All right, I really
All right, man. Hang 10.
take care. All right.
Surfers rule.
And cut. Oh my gosh. Oh my gosh. Oh my gosh. A side, B side. Wow. Wow. I'm holding an actual piece of Smile. That's what would have been. Here's in Villains Part 1. Here's in Villains Part 2. Wow. Wow.